Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 29. Loneliness. Ichigo once again matched blades against Aizen, Tensa Zangetsu and Kyoka Suigetsu, each struggling to overcome the other. You claim to be immortal, Aizen. He breathed, his horned mask looking into the visage of Aizen's blackened skull. Then why is it that when our blades meet like this, all I can feel is fear in your blade? Fear, Aizen scoffed. You misinterpret. If there is anything I fear, it is that you will die too soon for me to reach my ultimate evolution. As that's so, you should fear me, Aizen. Ichigo's hollowified voice deepened even further as his amber orbs bored holes into Aizen's eyes. I have cut off your head, I have ripped out the Hogyoku. You have yet to even strike me. Then perhaps it's time to correct that. The hollow skulls at the tips of Aizen's wings charged Seros once again, and Ichigo prepared a Sero in his horns, ready to counter, but when they fired, they missed entirely, confusing him. Ichigo. He's fired at Karakura. Ichigo's eyes widened in horrified realization, before he vanished again with a burst of raw speed, rushing to intercept the several beams. Aizen had been smart and not combined them all into one combined blast, given that Ichigo was able to overwhelm such a blast with a Sero of his own. Instead, there were 6 Seros aimed at different parts of the town. There was no time to think. Appearing between the Seros and Karakura, with not a second to spare, Ichigo swung Tensa Zangetsu horizontally with all his might. Getsuga Tensho. The Getsuga this time was of epic proportions, its breadth as wide as Karakura itself, its height almost half as tall as Karakura's tallest buildings. The Seros impacted not a moment later, and exploded, taking the Getsuga with it. Ichigo had mastered the Getsuga Tensho to the point where the Getsuga was only strong enough to take the Seros, and no more. It would drain him too much to create a Getsuga that large capable of doing significant damage to Aizen. As it was, creating that counterblast had made Ichigo lose sight of Aizen. Until, that is, Aizen appeared in front of Ichigo. Know your own powerlessness. Hado 90. Kurohitsugi. When nothing seemed to happen, Ichigo blinked in confusion. Wasn't that supposed to do something? He asked mockingly. Look behind you. Ichigo did with a sense of horrified realization, and was filled with anger as he saw that part of Karakura was engulfed in the black box of Aizen's favorite Kido. To make it worse, he recognized what area it was too. It had his home and its entire neighborhood. Yuzu. Karen. And then his eyes widened. Oh Kami, I told Mom go there with everyone. The wizard rushed at top speed to get to the Kido. Arriving a few seconds later, Ichigo sensed an incoming blast of Aizen's Seros rocketing straight towards him. Roaring angrily, he threw a Getsuga-enhanced Tensa Zangetsu at the Kurohitsugi, the chain extending automatically. Almost before it left his hand, Ichigo twisted around and lowered his horns, charging another Sero. 3 things happened at once. The Kurohitsugi shattered like glass, pieces of the Kido falling around the neighborhood before breaking further and further until there was no trace of the immensely powerful Hado. Ichigo fired the Sero, obliterating the incoming combined blast from Aizen. But the third thing was, Aizen arrived, the hollow skulls adorning his wings all having a Sero aimed in a different direction. Aizen promptly swung Kyoka Suigetsu and cut the chain connecting Ichigo to Tensa Zangetsu, leaving the blade stuck in the ground. Foolish, Ichigo-kun, he chided. You might have killed me had you sacrificed your town. And you should never part from your weapon unless you're sure you can get it back. What makes you think I can't? Ichigo snarled. The fact that if you try, these handy skulls of mine will destroy this lovely neighborhood. You're bluffing, Ichigo accused. You need their souls for your Okayan. There are plenty more, Aizen countered with a shrug-like motion that looked quite strange on his hollow form. Not to mention, we are in Soul Society. There is plenty of spiritually enriched land and souls here. Ichigo froze, having been about to Sonito down and get his trusty Zanpakuto. Aizen was right. That's low, Aizen, he growled. While it was almost impossible to determine expression on Aizen's skull-like face at the moment, his body language screamed smugness to Ichigo. They are your weakness, he explained airily. Why would I not take advantage? Ichigo's body shook with repressed rage. He wanted nothing more than to make Aizen die the most painful, agonizing death he could imagine. And right now, he was imagining pushing Aizen onto a bed of rusty nails, setting his whole body on fire, and then putting a watertight seal over his head and neck that Ichigo would slowly fill with Aizen's own blood so the wizard could joyfully watch him struggle to breathe until he drowned. You will pay for this, he swore. I think not, Ichigo-kun. You see, I have come to realize that it is too much trouble to use Karakura for the Okayan. Ichigo blinked in shock. What? I said that it's too much trouble to use Karakura. You should be happy, Ichigo-kun. You have convinced me not to use your precious town. Aizen paused for a moment. Instead, I will use the Rukongai. It really is easier on all parties involved. Your town is safe, the Seraiti is safe, and I have my Okayan. Everyone wins. You can't be serious. Oh, I am perfectly serious, Ichigo-kun. And all you have to do to keep your town from being destroyed and sacrificed is to not attempt to stop me. That's it. All Ichigo had to do was wait for Aizen to leave, and then he could go kill Aizen far away from Karakura. Yes, but before I go, I want your solemn word of honor as protector of Karakura town that you will not inhibit me from making the Okayan as long as I don't use your town for it. Ichigo got the impression that Aizen was smiling knowingly behind that skull mask of his. I have the impression that you won't break your word. Ichigo was silent for several moments, unmoving. It was a horrible decision to make. To sacrifice his home to stop Aizen, or allow Aizen his goal and sacrifice thousands of people he had never and would never meet. There was no way for him to stop that many Sero blasts in different directions. In the time it would take for the wizard to reach the Hogyoku evolved Shinigami, even forgetting Tensa Zangetsu, Aizen would be able to unleash his attacks. Also, Aizen had to leave and soon, or else his Reiatsu would smother the life out of those nearby. It was doubtful that Ichigo could even kill him in one shot, with Aizen's immortality. Can either of you think of a third option? Ichigo begged Tensa Zangetsu and Cazador de la Luna desperately. But neither spirit said a word. Ichigo had to make a choice. He looked away, at war with himself. How could he sacrifice everyone he'd ever known? How could he sacrifice people he'd never know? How could he live with himself, no matter what decision he made? Kurosaki Ichigo. Ichigo froze in mid-sentence, hearing a familiar voice calling his name, but not out loud. It was more, in his head. This is Yukatake Taicho. We are communicating using a Kido spell cast by one of our Fukuteicho. Aizen cannot hear us, but I'm afraid the spell is one way only. We have been watching and listening to your fight from a distance to keep from being affected by Aizen's illusions, and we know of your situation. We cannot stop Aizen. The fact is, you are our last hope. I know how hard the decision must be, but you must not let Aizen create the Okayan. But how can I just allow anyone to be killed or destroyed under Aizen's Reiatsu? Ichigo thought in horror. He shook his head. There was no good option. All he could do was protect that which he held dear. I want your word in return that you will forever leave Karakura and its residents alone. You have my word. No, Ichigo, don't do it. Sorry, Yukatake-san. And you have mine. Oh no, Yukatake breathed. This is bad, Hiraku agreed grimly. Very bad. Jashiro, Naneo, contact the Kido Corps. I am authorizing emergency use of the Forbidden Time and Space Kido. We have no choice but to try to freeze time around Karakura to trap Aizen within it. Everyone else except Soifin, your orders are to stay one step ahead of Aizen and clear all the districts of the Rukongai. Make sure there aren't enough people for him to sacrifice within any half-spirit mile. Go now, we don't have much time. As ordered, everyone but Soifin vanished in a flicker of Shunpo. What are my orders, Hiraku Taicho? Soifin, Hiraku murmured sadly. I don't like to give orders like these, but in the event that we cannot freeze Aizen in time, do whatever it takes to convince Ichigo that Aizen cannot be trusted to keep his word. Hi. Soifin promptly vanished. Neither combatant moved for several moments after Ichigo made his solemn promise. Aizen studied Ichigo carefully, searching for any hint of betrayal. Seeing none, seeing Ichigo's defeated posture, Aizen was finally convinced that he was telling the truth. I thought you'd see things my way, Ichigo-kun. Aizen powered down his Seros and with a flash of light, reappeared high in the air. I hold you to your word, Kurosaki Ichigo. Farewell. With that, Aizen began to walk away, knowing and relishing how Ichigo was watching his back. cursing his own powerlessness. Ichigo's fists clenched as his eyes almost involuntarily bored holes in Aizen's back. How he loathed himself right now. Ichigo, Tensa Zangetsu warned bracingly. Please calm yourself. Your inner world is beginning to flood. I'm not strong enough. As you said before, it is not weak to value life. You were placed in a position where there were no good outcomes. Regardless of your choice, life would have been lost. You chose to protect those you had claimed as your own. I can't really blame you for following your nature. You must accept your actions, and work out your next step. Ichigo's eyes still refused to leave that spot on Aizen's neck. I don't think I can accept them, Tensa Zangetsu. So many people are going to die. You gave your word of honor. Will you break it? When you have nothing else, you have your honor, your pride. Your word, your trustworthiness, is important to you, is it not? For the first time, Ichigo understood how Kuchiki Byakuya must have felt when Rukia was sentenced to be executed. Torn between his promise to his late wife, Hisana, to protect her little sister Rukia, and his vow to always uphold the law, Ichigo was now in exactly Byakuya's position, torn between his promise to allow Aizen to pursue his ambitions, and his vow to always protect those he could. In the end, Ichigo had fought Byakuya and in victory, convinced the Taicho to protect his adopted sister. It was in that recollection that Ichigo found his answer. His body, which had been trembling in helpless rage, began to still as he came to a decision. Some things are more important than honor. More important than pride. More important than my word. Ichigo's hollow eyes flashed with resolve. Guarding life, that is the most important thing of all. Ichigo extended his right claw towards his Zanpakuto. Come to me, Tensa Zangetsu. The Bankai blade flew through the air, flipping in the air end over end until the hilt impacted with his hand, the chain rejoining where it had been broken earlier. Ichigo could feel the pride resonating within his Zanpakuto as his spirit spoke to him. You have found your answer, Ichigo. Now let's go kill that bastard. Ichigo tilted his head to the sky, flaring his Reiatsu into a column that pierced the sky. Aizen, he roared. Not far away, Aizen twisted around instantly, only to see nothing but Ichigo's mask right in front of his face, murder in his eyes, before pain erupted within him. Tensa Zangetsu had pierced his neck right down the middle. You should never have threatened those under my protection. Ichigo's voice was low, dangerous. Kyoka Suigetsu slashed out, but Ichigo was suddenly gone, and so was half of Aizen's neck. The Hogyoku repaired the damage a moment later as Aizen twisted around, raising his blade to stop his enemy's next attack. Except the Vizard apparently finished his attack with no resistance. It was as if Aizen's own sword was an illusion. To Aizen's stunned eyes, Ichigo had, for the first time in this fight, used both hands to wield his Zanpakuto, around which a Getsuga Tensho seethed. Tensa Zangetsu was pointed down, though, so. The next instant, all Aizen knew was pain. Kyoka Suigetsu screamed in his head as the top portion of its blade fell to the ground. Aizen screamed aloud as Tensa Zangetsu removed his arm, and all of a sudden he was defenseless against the flurry of attacks. His wings were shredded and then brutally ripped out when Ichigo vanished, his left arm joined his right falling to the ground, and quite suddenly, Ichigo had a Sero pointed directly at Aizen's head, and he had no way to counter it. All I felt in Kyoka Suigetsu just then, was fear. Do you fear me? You should. So what if I am afraid? Aizen demanded, trying to buy time for his regeneration to give him a new set of arms and help with Kyoka Suigetsu's restoration. He would have retreated, but Ichigo had already proven that distance meant nothing to someone of his speed. Fear is the key to the Hogyoku evolutions. But it is also the weakness of your Shinigami strength, Ichigo reminded Aizen strongly. Fear saps the strength of your resolve, the strength of your Reiatsu, the strength of your sword. I won the moment you began to fear me, Aizen, when you gave up on your Zanpakuto's ability to support you. Oh, and don't think I've forgotten about your regeneration. Aizen let loose a bellow of pain as his arms were once again removed before they could even be completely formed again. Fine then, I still cannot sense your Reiatsu, he grit out. How is it possible that you have evolved to a still higher form than I? You trained for a paltry 3 months, yet you have progressed further than I have in centuries. Abandon your fear, look forward, move forward and never stop. You'll age if you pull back. You'll die if you hesitate. Ichigo quoted. Those are the words that my Zanpakuto told me when we first became partners, the creed I now live by. I have not stopped, nor will I ever stop moving forward in my pursuit to protect those I care for. That, Aizen, is why I am so strong. I don't understand. How can anyone gain such power by surrounding themselves with weaklings? Aizen cried out. I wanted you to see that you could never defeat me by holding ties to those humans. Ichigo glared down at his foe, charging another Sero in his horns to match the ones at his fingers. You will never understand, Aizen. To protect those weaker than myself is my reason for strength. Now just die, Aizen Sosuke. Kyoka Suigetsu, come to me. But for the first time in Aizen's memory, his Zanpakuto did not answer his call. In that barest of an instant, Aizen realized that he had abandoned the only being that he had trusted completely, the only being who had supported him every step of the way. Kyoka Suigetsu could no longer hear him. Sero. Once more, Aizen's head was vaporized under the focused beams of Ichigo's hollow power, his skull-like visage a mask of confusion. His body began to fall, but Ichigo's left hand once more plucked the Hogyoku from Aizen's corpse. Ichigo glared at it disdainfully, not daring to cancel his resurrection. Aizen should be popping up any second now, his immortality reviving him, hopefully weakened enough for Urahara's seal to take place. Ichigo waited a beat, then too, still sensing no Reiatsu, he blinked behind his mask, and glanced at the Hogyoku, half expecting it to have vanished and somehow made Aizen evolve past what Ichigo could sense, disaster though that would be. Nope, still there. Do you think he's? If he is, then I have only one thing to say, immortal my ass. Hisonito down to where he'd seen Aizen's headless body fall, and stood over the corpse, watching it for another few seconds, on guard just in case Aizen tried a sneak attack. After almost a minute, it was clear. Aizen was dead. Ichigo immediately felt a vague ache in his heart. He'd wanted to kill Aizen, he'd wanted it so much. Aizen deserved it, that was for sure, but suddenly, knowing that he had exerted his power enough to actually do it, to end Aizen's life was painful. Ichigo was suddenly horribly aware that he had the power to end almost everyone's lives. He was a kami compared to pretty much everyone he knew. He could do quite literally anything he wanted, and no one would be able to stop him. Who would dare try after what he'd done tonight, after the power he'd displayed so casually? Ichigo's eyes shifted to his hands. He'd never before understood how absolute power could corrupt absolutely. It was a weight heavier than any Ichigo had ever known, feeling as though he was the one who decided who lived and who died. No, he thought to himself, shaking his head. I will remain true to myself. My reason for strength is to be a guardian, a force of protection. I will not interfere. Now what? Ichigo wasn't sure he liked the fact that his hollow sounded just as unsure as he himself felt. The fact of the matter was, his focus for months had been growing strong enough to protect everyone from Aizen. Now, he was stronger than anyone he knew, save perhaps Yamamoto and the older Taicho. Well, I suppose we pick a direction, and move forward. First things first, we need to figure out what to do with Aizen's body. But before he could begin that conversation with his hollow and Zanpakuto, he sensed someone with a familiar Reiatsu Shunpo several meters behind him. Ichigo didn't turn around. What is it, Urahara? Is he dead? Canceling his resurrection and removing his mask, Ichigo still didn't face the ex-Taicho. He damn well better be. That's the second time I've obliterated his head today. I'm kinda surprised, though. Why's that? The Hogyoku didn't vanish again and heal him, Ichigo stated, looking at the orb that had caused so much trouble. Jin used his Bankai to open up Aizen's chest and took it, but Aizen called it back and regenerated. Isero ed his head off, but Aizen called it back and regenerated. Now I did it again, and this time he didn't. I just don't know why, especially after Aizen claimed the Hogyoku made him immortal. I imagine that is rather confusing to someone who doesn't know the truth of the Hogyoku's powers. That statement did cause Ichigo to turn around and stare incredulously at the man who'd invented the damn thing. And what is that truth? The Hogyoku materializes the heartfelt desires of those around it, Urahara said simply. Upon being mastered, it allowed Aizen to evolve as he wished, using fear as the trigger. However, I believe that it now acknowledges you as its master, after defeating Aizen so many times, after proving the strength of your soul was superior to his. So when you took the Hogyoku out of Aizen's body this time, it did not return because Aizen was no longer its master. And without it, Aizen was no longer immortal, which allowed you to kill him. I don't know, Ichigo whispered, thinking of the feelings he had received from matching blades with Aizen, receiving those glimpses into his true feelings. He hadn't quite told the whole truth when he said he felt nothing but fear reflected in Kyoka Suigetsu. Aizen's feeling of solitude had grown as well, almost to the point of loneliness. Aizen has been on a level of his own from the start, hasn't he? I think he saw me as an opportunity to create someone on his level. A rival, maybe, or a friend. Someone he couldn't manipulate with his illusions. Someone who could understand him, maybe even sympathized. He chuckled, looking down at Aizen's decimated corpse. Every battle I've faced him in, I've felt nothing but solitude in his blade. And by his own words, he's created most of the situations that forced me to grow stronger, to evolve. I believe that what he wanted above all else, was a companion who would stand with him at the top. Maybe he felt that after a century or two, our battles to the death would evolve into rivalry, and then perhaps into a friendship of equals, because who else could we turn to? The more he talked, the more it made sense to Ichigo, the more he was sure that he understood Aizen's spirit. Touch is such a huge part of human affection. Can you imagine not being able to receive even a simple pat on the shoulder? To play around with your friends. Can you imagine complete physical isolation? To Aizen and I, our evolutions kept us from doing that to any save each other. To us, it would be such an enormous gift to be able to actually touch one another, be it in combat or in friendship. It would be a sign that we are not alone. That was why Aizen made the deal to leave Karakura alone. He didn't want to alienate me completely, I don't think. The last few minutes of our fight, I felt fear in Aizen's sword. Fear of what? I couldn't tell at the time. But I think he was trying to catch up to me, because I had somehow managed to evolve further than he had. So he let himself fear, knowing it was the Hogyoku's key to evolution. I think his fear was not of his own death, but of losing forever the possibility of him and me ever meeting on the same level of evolution, of ever eventually reconciling our differences and moving forward to a new future. That was why his form took on a hollow appearance at the end, Ichigo theorized. Fear, regret, worry, Aizen fell into despair, I think, when he felt my resolve to protect everyone even at the cost of my life, and hatred for him involving my family and friends. The Hogyoku felt his despair, and gave him a form that suited his soul while granting his wish of evolution. Such terrible despair, and such lonely solitude, that just one hollow hole could not suffice. Even now, Aizen has had the last laugh, the wizard realized aloud. Aizen desired an end to his loneliness, and he has gained it through the mercy of death and rebirth, leaving me to suffer the loneliness he has escaped, as my evolution and power sets me apart from everyone else. I am not even sure I can return to my body, for fear it would collapse under my Reiatsu. I cannot devolve and return to what I once was. I am, for all intents and purposes, stuck. So perhaps, just before he died, when he felt my resolve to kill him, Aizen gave the Hogyoku to me, preferring death and reincarnation to eternal solitude. Perhaps he felt that I deserved the chance, to use the Hogyoku for myself, to materialize my heartfelt desire. Ichigo, Urahara whispered, at once understanding what the young man meant. Ichigo glanced at the jewel in his hand, before he held it out to Urahara. I don't know what I am going to do now, Urahara. Please hold on to it for now. Urahara took it gingerly, careful not to touch Ichigo at all. Are you all right? He asked quietly. No, I wanted him to die with all my being, but I didn't expect him to lose his immortality. Ichigo looked down on Aizen's corpse, his face unreadable. Aizen was right, taking the life of another sentient being hurts in a way that I can't describe. But I did what I had to, in order to ensure my people are protected. Urahara bowed his head. Duty is poor solace to taking a life, Ichigo. As a former Taicho, and a former assassin, I know that very well. Is there? The evolved wizard merely shook his head. Take care of Aizen's body. I need some time to myself. With that, he flickered away with Shunpo. Urahara glanced down at Aizen's headless corpse before shaking his head. You've cost us so much, Aizen, is it strange for me to feel like our greatest cost was that boy's innocence? A hand clasped his shoulder. No, Kazuki, Yoruichi whispered. I don't think that's strange at all. Soifun followed Kurosaki to the best of her ability. The wizard, though too highly evolved for her to feel his Reiatsu at all, was relatively easy to keep in sight since he wasn't utilizing his full speed. She kept her Reiatsu suppressed to keep from being detected, just in case the boy had somehow improved that skill as well. She'd witnessed him defeating Aizen, but Kurosaki was too powerful to go unwatched. Until she could assign some Onimitsukido to arrange a full-time watch, she would have to gather what information she could. Strangely, Kurosaki wasn't heading to his human home. Instead, he had gone to the tallest building in Karakura, settling into a crouching position on the rounded end of a flagpole, balanced on the balls of his feet, overlooking a large part of the city. To her surprise, he seemed strangely comfortable there. Kurosaki looked up at the sky, his mouth moving, but Soifun couldn't hear the words as the substitute Shinigami was too far away and speaking too quietly. However, Soifun was still an assassin, and any assassin worth their blade knew how to read lips. Now what? Now what? Indeed, Kurosaki. It was a good question. For the Gote 13, it would probably go back to business as usual. A new Central 46 would be elected, Ichimaru Jin and Tosen Kanami would be tried after their eventual recovery, and the Taicho would figure out who would take over the empty Taicho slots. But for the substitute Shinigami, Aizen's gone. How can I just go back to my human life after what feels like a lifetime of war? What do I want to do now? Kurosaki sighed. All this time, I've known what I needed to do. I needed to protect my family. I needed to save Rukia. I needed to defeat my inner hollow. I needed to protect everyone from Aizen. All this time, my goals have been reactions to threats. But now, there is no one relying on me to protect them from some imminent enemy. What do you think, Tensa Zangetsu, Cazador de la Luna? Think it's time for that vacation? Before Soifun's startled eyes, two figures materialized on either side of Kurosaki. One seemed quite young, with shoulder-length ragged black hair and a flowing black cloak with its hood back. He crouched on the beam of the flagpole, much the same way as Kurosaki though facing a different direction. The other was almost a carbon copy of Kurosaki himself, save for the open white vest, red leggings, hollow hole in his chest and mask fragment on his face. He instead leaned against the building itself, using the airwalk technique to keep from falling. All three looked up at the sky together. Soifun took the opportunity to get a little closer, close enough to actually hear them, since she couldn't watch all three sets of lips at once. Yes, the young man, who had to be the manifestation of Tensa Zangetsu, agreed. You were extremely overstressed, Ichigo. You haven't had time for a break practically since the beginning, the being who could only be Cazador de la Luna concurred. When was the last time you really relaxed? Kurosaki sighed. It's been so long, I don't even remember anymore. There was a pause, before Kurosaki's hollow spoke up again. I'm thinking we should go hit a beach for our vacation. Nice, warm, relaxing, and if you want to you can check out the babes. Kurosaki snorted. Yeah, women we can't touch without accidentally disintegrating them from our Reiatsu. You can work on that on the side, Ichigo. So long as you don't unleash your Shikai in your human body, you should be capable of touching others without harming them. If need be, I'm sure Urahara would help you seal away your powers for a time. Well, when you put it that way, maybe some time on a beach would be good for me. It'd be nice to actually feel like a teenager again, rather than a war veteran. The three stood in silence for a couple of minutes, before Tensa Zangetsu changed the topic. Why are you not heading home, Ichigo? That's a very good question, Soifun agreed, listening closely. Kurosaki swallowed audibly. I'm not sure I can face them right now without falling apart, he finally replied, his voice aching with sorrow. And I'm worried that touching them now, even if I dismiss the Bankai, will hurt them. Ichigo, can you take not seeing your mother when she's so close after so many years? I thought I was heartless, and I'm your inner hollow. There was silence for another few moments as the wizard bowed his head, his longer hair covering his eyes and part of his face. Are you trying to punish yourself, Ichigo? For not being strong enough to save her on that day 6 years ago, where the rain flooded both that river and your soul? 6 years ago, Soifun quickly did the math. Kurosaki was, 9 years old. His mother died in front of him. Well then, it seems I have my method to control him. No, Kurosaki firmly denied. Grand Fisher is responsible for that. Then what are you waiting for, Ichigo? Nothing. I'm going now. He stood up from his crouched position, and the two spirits dissipated. That done, he flickered away with Shunpo. Soifun didn't dare move to follow just yet. There was a good chance Kurosaki would sense her if she raised her Reiatsu enough to Shunpo. Even so, the conversation she'd witnessed was an incredibly rare look at the dynamics between Kurosaki, his Zanpakuto, and his hollow. Most Shinigami never materialized their Zanpakuto spirit outside of attempting to gain Bankai. It was rather draining, and conversations could be had mentally in any case. While she'd need to go over it again later, Soifun could tell that Tensa Zangetsu seemed to be a very perceptive, if slightly blunt, character. Cazador de la Luna, on the other hand, seemed a bit cruder, if his comment about women on the beach was any indication. But Kurosaki seemed to value their input, and revealed his emotions to them, that suggested that despite his near-constant use of Bankai, there was no real sense of domination over his Zanpakuto. Instead, there was trust, camaraderie. Strangely, the hollow seemed as concerned over Kurosaki's mental state as Tensa Zangetsu. Perhaps there was some form of symbiosis between them. If Kurosaki relies on Cazador for his hollow powers, does Cazador rely on Kurosaki for his Shinigami ones? It was a strange thought, but it would certainly explain Cazador's Arrancar appearance. Almost 5 minutes had passed. Soifun judged it safe enough to move, and began making her way back to the Seraiti. She had plans to finish. It was a good thing that Kurosaki was planning on going on vacation. It would give her a chance to plant some Onomitsukido in his mother's district. Standing in front of his home, Ichigo found himself hesitating. It was his last chance to back out. Abandon your fear. Ichigo nodded, mentally thanking Tensa Zangetsu. Taking a deep breath, he dismissed his Bankai, reverting to Shikai state. Slinging Zangetsu across his back as usual, he approached the door, hearing the murmurs of conversation but unable to actually hear what was being said. With that, he opened the door. All conversation stopped as Ichigo entered his home and looked around. On the couch were Tatsuki, Mizuhiro, Keigo and Don Kanonji. Standing up and apparently having been giving a lecture, was Zenisuke. Hey guys, Ichigo whispered. Where are? In the kitchen, Tatsuki said quickly. The wizard nodded and walked slowly to the kitchen, which until then had been Yuzu's domain. He could hear soft crying coming from inside, but he gathered his courage and entered as quietly as he could. In the middle of the kitchen with her back to him was Ichigo's mother, Masaki. Karen seemed to have clutched onto Masaki's left leg, while Yuzu was on her right. Ichigo's father, Isshin, was holding Masaki closely, though he still hadn't returned to his human body. His eyes were closed, but there was a steady trickle of tears down his face. Mommy, Yuzu sobbed into her leg. We missed you so much. Silently allowing tears to run down her cheeks, Karen seemed content to clutch Masaki's leg as though her mother would disappear if she ever let go. Ichigo knew perfectly well that at her age, he too would have been doing the same thing. But now, Ichigo was unsure of what to do. He wasn't good at expressing his emotions, but at this point not even he knew what he wanted, what he desperately needed. He set Zangetsu down gently against the wall, hoping that the separation would make the difference in whether Ichigo could touch his mother or not. But apparently, that made more noise than he thought, because Isshin's eyes opened and honed in on his position. Come here, Ichigo. Ichigo, Masaki's watery voice asked. She turned around, her twin daughters moving with her so as not to tangle her. For the second time that day, mother and son locked eyes. Mom, before he could warn her, Masaki had walked over and pulled him into a hug. Her right hand behind his head, her left at his back, Ichigo found himself pressed physically against her, his head over her left shoulder. Ichigo came to his senses a second later, tensing and ready to pull himself away to save his mother's afterlife, but she was unharmed. Relief hit him then, sharp and cutting straight to his heart. Tears flowed to his eyes unbidden as he wrapped his arms around his mother and held her tightly, and Ichigo's eyes closed as he wept. Chapter 30. What now? Ichigo didn't know how long he stood there, holding his mother. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. All he knew was that when they finally separated, his eyes had long since run out of tears. Ichigo, Yuzu, Karen, Masaki murmured, gently breaking off the hug. How many years has it been? You've all grown so much. I'm 16 now, Ichigo whispered. It seemed so surreal now, like a dream, to have his mother back, even if she was a spirit. It's been 6.5 years. Quickly drawing the correct conclusions, Masaki glanced downwards at her twin daughters. You're 11 years old. I've missed so much, I'm so sorry. Ichigo felt a twinge in his heart at that. Did she blame him for getting her killed? It's all right, Mom, Karen assured her, her voice a bit choked up. You're here now. Let's get your mother caught up on everything, shall we? Isshin asked rhetorically, his face bearing a smile. And so, the Kurosaki family reclaimed the living room. Zenisuke, Tatsuki, Keigo and Mizuhiro had left already. Since Aizen was apparently gone, otherwise, Ichigo would still be fighting, they figured it was likely safe to return to where they should be. Ichigo, still wary about the effects of his reiatsu on his family, took a nearby comfy chair. Isshin sat across from him, while Masaki, Yuzu and Karen settled on the couch. The conversation started haltingly, but soon they had gotten caught up in the storytelling, with Isshin only occasionally interjecting. Yuzu told her mother how she had taken over the household, the cooking and cleaning especially, and how she teamed up with her father on spying on Ichigo at times. Isshin, Ichigo and Karen all praised Yuzu for being the one who managed to keep them together as a family during those troubled years of grief. Karen laid out her life simply, sharing how she'd been able to see ghosts for almost all her life but refusing to believe in them, how she'd joined the soccer team and grown stronger, strong enough to not let her family worry about her. Now she was even able to take care of the weaker hollows. When it was Ichigo's turn, he found he had a very dry throat. What could he say? His life had been far from easy, but if anyone deserved to know, his mother did. So, he began with his karate training with Tatsuki. Masaki already knew about that, she'd picked him up from the dojo before she died, so it was a decent place to start in Ichigo's mind. Then he described how he'd come to need the skills he picked up from there as bullies and thugs picked on him because of his hair color, and how he'd gained a best friend for life when he saved Chad. He relived the exhilaration of finally beating Tatsuki in karate, and explained how his skills as a fighter gave him a reputation, one that persisted due to the thugs who kept challenging him. I know, hardly the best thing for a high school teenager, Ichigo admitted when he saw his mother's shocked face. But I'm not going to dye my hair just to avoid fights. I won't let anyone stupid enough to challenge me force me to change something I got from you. Yuzu, who had more than once urged Ichigo to dye his hair to keep from coming home bruised and bleeding, barely held in a gasp as Ichigo finally gave his true reasons for his stubborn refusal. Ichigo had indeed inherited Masaki's fiery orange-red hair, and who could blame him for wanting to hold on to that precious piece of her after she had died? Masaki smiled, flattered but unsurprised. How did you become a Shinigami? Ichigo grew quiet for several seconds before he nodded, knowing where to begin. Last year, my life changed forever when a Shinigami leapt in through my window. Her name was Kuchiki Rukia, and she was looking for a hollow that my reiatsu had attracted. She explained what she was, and what her purpose was in Karakura. But then she sensed the hollow, which had injured Dad, and captured Yuzu. She had bound me in a bakudo, but I broke it and chased after her, leaping at the hollow to save Yuzu. Ichigo chuckled self-deprecatingly, raising his hand to his neck and rubbing it. I was smacked away effortlessly, and Rukia got very injured trying to purify it. She asked me if I wanted to save my family, and when I agreed to do anything, she thrust her Zanpakuto into my heart, giving me her Shinigami powers. With them, I slew the hollow effortlessly. That was the start. I ended up getting my own powers, but that story is the beginning of a war that ends with Aizen's death by my hand. We've got nothing but time, Ichigo, Isshin assured him with a small smile. Besides, it's time we got the full story. Initially about to refuse, a glance at his mother's face, pleading to know exactly who her son was after so many years of absence, Ichigo relented. His family was the perfect audience. They gasped at all the right parts, and even Karen looked stricken when Ichigo related how close he'd come to losing against his hollow side permanently when it came to saving Inoue. Almost 2 hours and a tall glass of water later, he finished his story with the choice Aizen had forced him to make on who to sacrifice, and how he'd come to his decision to forsake pride, honor and his word, to fulfill his vow to protect everyone. By the time Ichigo had finished, his mother was crying once again. My baby boys, all grown up. Ichigo felt distinctly uncomfortable with how he'd made his mother cry, but he had no idea how to fix it. Looking slightly panicked, he leaned forward, waving his hands in front of him as though to deny her claims. Well, Isshin, on the other hand, merely got up, made his way to the couch, and reached an arm around his late wife. Masaki, he's had to learn some hard lessons early due to the war. But Ichigo's still a teenager, and he has a lot to learn about life, rather than the practice of death. He still needs you, just not for the same reasons as when he was young. To Ichigo's surprise, Masaki managed to nod, swallowing her tears and murmuring apologies, which were quickly waved off by everyone. It had been a very emotional day, by anyone's standards. Wow. For once, Ichigo was impressed with his father. He hadn't acted like a total fool, and had instead somehow managed to quickly identify and address the exact issue Masaki was having. How did he do that? That said, Ichigo, I'm very proud of you. You were put into an impossible position that no man should ever be placed in, and you found an answer you can live with without regret. So what are you going to do now? I'm thinking, it's time for a vacation. A vacation? Karen and Yuzu asked in unison. Ichigo gave a sharp nod. Yeah, I've had enough of war, of desperate struggles to get stronger in time, of life-changing realizations of who and what I am, of choices that decide the fate of thousands of people. So as soon as I'm back in my body, I'm going to take a vacation, and figure out what I'm going to do from now on. I need time to feel like a human teenager again. Anything that isn't life-threatening can wait until I get back. Isshin nodded seriously. He knew that there were limits to what the human mind could take. Endless fighting put a strain on the psyche that nothing but time, rest and relaxing experiences could relieve. There would be other challenges, but he could tell as a former leader and a doctor that his son needed the reprieve, or he would reach his mental breaking point. Though it tore him up as a father, he knew that he could no longer treat his son as a child. The war had forced Ichigo to mature early. Though there were things that Ichigo did not know, lessons he had yet to learn, he was an adult. Ichigo could be nothing less after what he'd been through. By this point, Soifun had long since returned to Soul Society and alerted Kyoraku Taicho that Aizen was dead, and the Kido Corps was no longer necessary. The Taicho had all been recalled from the orders that Kyoraku Taicho had ordered, and had immediately been given new assignments. Squad 4 was treating Yamamoto, Jin and Tosen, while Hitsugaya and Komamura stood watch, just in case. Neither of the traitors could be trusted, and having two Taicho there should prove a large deterrent from them causing trouble. Yukitake had returned to his quarters for a rest. The fights had stressed his body, and while his illness had yet to resurface, he wanted to ensure that Squad 4 didn't need to deal with him while they had critical patients. Kyoraku had taken up Yamamoto's duties in addition to his own, and was for once not so laid back and lackadaisical about what had to be done. He complained lightly about it, but it was nothing compared to how lazy he usually was when dealing with his own squad. It was perhaps the first time that Soifun had seen what Yamamoto had in the man. Kyoraku might actually have what it took to be Sotaicho one day. Soifun herself had quickly assigned a team of 5 Onimitsukido to spy on the Kurosaki family and report back to her in a few days. The team Yamamoto had dispatched to Haweko Mundo finally returned shortly afterward. Because all the other Taicho were so busy, it had naturally fallen to her to deal with getting their reports. Soifun had immediately sent Unohana and the other healers to her division. Their healing prowess was more needed than her report, which Soifun believed she could ascertain from the others. Strangely enough, Hinamori Momo was being carried by one of Unohana's team members, but stifling her curiosity, Soifun moved on to acquiring the reports. Kenpachi was largely unharmed, and Yakiru Fukutecho was as cheery and healthy as ever. His report had been extremely casual, with many details missing. We wandered around a while before found a guy, called himself Yami. Byakuya got to him first, but he got bigger and madder, and we ended up fighting together. Then Kuretsuchi did his thing with stuff he got from some guy's lab, and opened the way back. Kuretsuchi Mayuri was completely unharmed, along with his Fukutecho, Nemu. We arrived in Hueco Mundo, and made our way to Las Noches, but for a while we couldn't find anyone. When I sensed Kuchiki Taicho using his Bankai, I made my way over to where he was, and found a quite interesting errand car that I would have loved to run experiments on. He fancied himself a scientist, you see. Mayuri grinned that wide grin that showed almost every single one of his teeth. It seemed that Kuchiki Taicho had been hit by a liquid that duplicated him several times, all versions using Bankai against each other. I stayed back to watch, as Kuchiki Taicho fought his clones until the Espada used another ability, creating a doll of Kuchiki Taicho. It was quite fascinating, really, witnessing how the Espada was able to destroy Kuchiki Taicho's internal organs just by crushing the doll's parts. I really must see if I can duplicate that ability in myself, it seems quite useful. Soifin cleared her throat. Oh, I killed the Espada and healed Kuchiki Taicho, before finding the Espada's lab. I found a device capable of creating a perfect Garganta, which I used to bring us back here. Nemu. Yes, she asked emotionlessly. Get everything we recovered from that wannabe scientist's lab to ours, and begin cataloging everything. Hi. Both Mayuri and Nemu left then, leaving Soifin stewing in her own frustration about Taicho who didn't take their jobs seriously enough to give professional reports. Mayuri had given extreme detail on the capabilities of an Arrancar that was now dead, and had been almost flippant about his possible technological findings, which were vastly more important. Luckily for her state of mind, there was Kuchiki Byakuya left, and he was well known for succinct, but thorough reports. After arriving in Hueco Mundo, we separated in the interest of finding and defeating more of the Arrancar, Byakuya reported calmly, stoically. I was stopped momentarily by a team of Arrancar who called themselves the Exequias, but they were quickly purified by my Shikai. In my exploration of Las Noches, I came across a labyrinth of stairs and walkways that led me to the Octava Espada, Zael Aporo grants. His Resurrección proved troublesome to defeat, until Kuretsuchi Taicho and his Fukutecho came to assist. He finally met his end at the hand of Kuretsuchi Taicho due to some unorthodox precautions Kuretsuchi Taicho had made within the body of his Fukutecho. Kuretsuchi Taicho remained on site to examine the Espada's lab after healing me with some of his drugs. I set out to search for more Arrancar, and found the Cerro Espada, Yami Yargo. Defeating him took some time due to his special ability of utilizing his rage to increase his strength exponentially, eventually requiring collaboration with Zaraki Taicho. In conclusion, I must state that substitute Shinigami Kurosaki Ichigo was correct in his information regarding the change in Yami's strength pre- and post-Resurrección. After Yami was defeated, Kuretsuchi Taicho utilized a new device that produced a stable Garganta, allowing us to return to the living world. We were met there by Sato Yasutora and the Quincy, Ishida Ryu. They explained that Hinamori Momo had arrived in the living world to gain answers from Aizen, and Aizen had used his illusions to convince her that Kurosaki Ichigo was the enemy. Sato and Ishida defeated her swiftly, but lacking the capability to transport her to Soul Society, had been waiting for our arrival. Afterwards, we used a Senkaimon to return to Soul Society. I know nothing of Unohana's actions in Hueco Mundo. The leader of the Onamitsukido could have sighed in relief. That was all the information she needed for the time being. Thank you, Kuchiki Taicho. Byakuya nodded slightly. Now, what has happened? I presume Aizen is dead. Soifin quickly gave him a synopsis of the day's events, focusing on Aizen and Kurosaki, though not neglecting to mention Jin's betrayal and Tosen's capture. I see. Byakuya's poker face gave nothing away that could give Soifin a glimpse into his thoughts. Thank you. He turned and began to leave. I ask your honest opinion, Kuchiki Taicho. Byakuya paused for a moment at the door. My honest opinion? Yes, Kurosaki Ichigo has many flaws. He is young, brash, disrespectful, and has no sense of tact. I dislike his casual attitude towards nobility and his disregard for tradition and law. However, he is not entirely unrespectable. With that, he swept out of the room, his words hanging in the air. And what is that supposed to mean? Soifin wondered, her eyes narrowed. His strength is respectable, yes, but there is something in the way he spoke that indicated more. She rubbed her temples. Why can no one understand that Kurosaki must be reined in? Because they have allowed themselves to put their feelings over their duty. Kurosaki has never done anything terrible to Soul Society, and every single person he fought gained a respect for him. Madarame, Abarai, Zaraki, Kuchiki, Suzumaki reminded her. The first three were in Squad 11. They only value strength and the ability to fight, which Kurosaki had. Kurosaki saved Kuchiki Taicho's sister. Soifan's eyes lit up in understanding before horror crossed over them once more. She was beginning to comprehend just how many people Kurosaki had on his side within the ranks of the Gote 13. By his actions, he'd managed to acquire a sizable chunk of support within the community. Then again, the community does not rule Soul Society, Soifan murmured to herself, recalling how Urahara and Yoruichi had been banished and the Vizard slated for execution, despite the outrage of the Taicho of the time. The Central 46. While she was already making plans to plant more Onimitsukido agents in Kurosaki Masaki's district, such a heavy-handed tactic should be kept as a last resort, Soifan reasoned. Instead, why not let the government make the decisions? It put the Gote 13 in the best possible position, enforcing law, rather than being the organization that was truly Kurosaki's enemy. The Central 46 had not reconvened since Aizen had killed their members, as Yamamoto had declared Soul Society to be in a state of martial law. The Central 46 only ruled during times of peace, as they were meant to represent the entirety of Soul Society. When it came to times of war, it had seemed reasonable that the Gote 13 be put in charge, being a military organization and knowing better than the public what actions had to be taken. Soifan nodded to herself. As soon as Yamamoto declared the war over, it was mandated by law that the Central 46 retake control of the government. The Central 46 had previously displayed anti-Vizard tendencies in the past. It shouldn't be difficult to instill some fear into them. Yep, though you might have problems keeping them from simply ordering you into assassinating him directly. Soifan paled. That was a problem. The Central 46 had ordered almost precisely that concerning the original Vizard group, and as the leader of the Onimitsukido, she had the best chance of killing Kurosaki. However, she hadn't been able to pierce Aizen, his Reiatsu overwhelming her own. Kurosaki had to have even more enormous Reiatsu than Aizen had, considering the traitor's evolutions. As a result, Kurosaki would be impossible to kill in her usual tactics. If only she had Zaraki Taicho's levels of Reiatsu, there could have been a. Soifan's eyes were wide as her back went ramrod straight, an idea forming almost faster than she could think. Hold on, Zaraki. His eye patch inhibits his Reiatsu significantly. How quickly could I commission research and development to make a stronger version that could work even on Kurosaki's Reiatsu? Without waiting for an answer from Suzumaki, not that she expected one, Soifan's Zanpakuto rarely spoke up since she'd gained Bankai. Soifan immediately began drafting a request for two such devices. One would be needed for Kurosaki, and one would be for herself. Soifan knew she needed to increase her Reiatsu reserves significantly if she wanted any sort of chance. Soifan nodded to herself, more confidently this time. She now had plans, tentative though they were. She would need to arrange to have Kurosaki willingly wear such a device, and that should prove no trouble, considering his fear of accidentally harming his family with his Reiatsu, and work on her own Reiatsu levels so if need be, she could take him out. Another alternative was convincing the boy to have a large portion of his Reiatsu sealed, much like how Taicho and Fukuteicho were required to have theirs sealed when on missions in the living world. The emergency backup plan was to use Kurosaki's mother as collateral. That simplified matters enormously. Soifan had no need to use the Central 46 at all. However, the ideal situation would be to have Kurosaki swear loyalty to the Gote 13. That power could be put to good use. But how to arrange that? Soifan needed to think more, but one of her subordinates brought her another stack of paperwork, and she resolved to work on that particular problem later. Urahara stood in front of the Kurosaki residence, his face remorseful. He did not like what he was about to do, but it was necessary. He knocked on the door in front of him. It was answered by Ichigo. Urahara. Ichigo, I'm sorry, but it's time. Ichigo blinked. Time for Karakura to return to the living world. I'm afraid your mother must remain in Soul Society. There was a cacophony of denial from Karen and Yuzu as they rushed and stood next to Ichigo steadfastly, blocking Urahara's path inside. Ichigo's expression was unreadable, however. Why? Ichigo. She is a purified spirit now. Her spirit body subsists on spirit particles in the air, she can't survive long the living world. Isn't there some other way? Urahara shook his head. Not until she has developed powers of her own. At that point I could devise a Gigai for her, but even then I wouldn't recommend it. She is known to the living world to be dead. Her body was found. Her name was registered as deceased. For her to suddenly return, it would create difficult questions. Ichigo felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning, he saw his mother smiling sadly. It's okay, Ichigo. But we just got you back. Yuzu cried out. It's not fair. Karen said nothing, but her expression indicated she agreed with her fraternal twin. Masaki kneeled down and held her daughters close. Sometimes, life isn't fair, darlings. I'll be waiting for you in Soul Society, but I don't want to see you there for a very long time. And when you do come to see me, I want to have a lifetime of stories, okay? Yuzu nodded, her eyes already leaking tears. Karen, however, wheeled on her older brother. Ichigo, you better be ready to deliver messages whenever you go to Soul Society. His throat dry, Ichigo could only nod. When Masaki stood up, the wizard hesitantly initiated a hug, which Masaki quickly accepted. Be safe, Ichigo pleaded. For the first time in years, Ichigo heard his mother laugh. It warmed his spirit and prompted a heartfelt smile of his own. I should be telling you that, young man, she chided, still smiling as she broke the hug. Don't worry, I'll be fine. If I do need anything, I'll see about contacting a Shinigami to get a hold of you. Thanks, Mom. Ichigo suddenly realized he felt a lot more at ease. Peaceful, even. It didn't take long for him to realize why. His mother was alive in a spiritual sense, happy and healthy. She didn't even blame him for her death. Even though she had to reside in Soul Society, he could see her every now and then. Masaki pulled him in to kiss him on his forehead, before doing the same to Yuzu and Karen. Then she turned and pulled Isshin into a hug, kissing him on the lips for a few seconds. I've missed you, Isshin whispered hoarsely. And I've missed you. Take good care of our children, Isshin. Ichigo's father nodded resolutely. I will. Her goodbyes made, Masaki gently pushed past her children and took Urahara's hand. Ichigo, your body will be waiting for you in the shop when the transfer is complete, Urahara informed. Yours too, Isshin. Then, with a flicker of shunpo, they were gone. With a sigh, Isshin closed the door to their home, and sat heavily down on the couch. I suppose you want my story, Ichigo? He asked heavily. Isshin was startled to see his son shake his head negatively at him, a smirk on his face. Nah, you had your reasons. When you're ready to tell me, then I'll listen. Ichigo leaned against the wall, looking up. But aren't you curious who I was? Isshin asked, astonished. A little, Ichigo admitted. But I can wait. Besides, his eyes glazed, recalling one of the life-changing lessons that his Zanpakuto had beaten into him, and paraphrasing a little. What difference does it make who you were, if I know who you are? Just then, Ichigo felt a wave of Reiatsu harmlessly pass over him. He blinked, before coming to the obvious conclusion. Back in the living world. Back in the living world, Isshin confirmed. Now then, let's get those bodies of ours. Upon leaving the building, Ichigo's father Shunpo-ed away. He needed his body quickly so he could actually be available as a doctor for if any emergencies came up. Ichigo decided to walk. He could use the quiet time to think. Now that there wasn't an immediate need to grow insanely stronger as quickly as possible, Ichigo contemplated what he wanted to do with his human lifetime. He'd never honestly thought about it before, but as a high school student Ichigo knew he had to think about it soon, and recent events had forcefully introduced him to realities of life and death. After having nearly lost his life several times by now, Ichigo's mind flashed to that first hollow that had attacked his family, to Byakuya destroying his powers, to fighting Kenpachi without his eye patch, to Aizen slashing him almost in two. Before Ichigo snapped out of his recollections, he wanted to make the most of it. But the question was, what do I want to do with my life? It was a tough question. Until recently, he hadn't really enjoyed doing much of anything. Ichigo had always felt his most alive when fighting after his mother had died. He snorted. Professional recreational fighter. We'd kick so much ass. We do have a bit of an unfair advantage, Ichigo reminded his inner hollow, though the corners of his lips pulled upwards in amusement. So let's use those advantages. Mercenary for hire. Bodyguard. International super spy. Despite himself, Ichigo chuckled at the last suggestion. Now you're just being ridiculous. Though, I could bodyguard, the wizard mused. The idea had some merit, he had to admit. It served to satisfy his instinctual desire to protect, and gave him an occasional fight. And if a hollow showed up, Ichigo would just have Khan take over his body while he went and took care of business. Not a bad idea, he finally muttered aloud, before noticing he'd almost reached Urahara's shop. Resolving to think about it later, he went in to talk to Urahara. He wanted to make sure his body wouldn't disintegrate with him inside it. Meanwhile, this is strange, Hachigen murmured from his meditative position within the wizard warehouse. I cannot sense Ichigo's Reiatsu anywhere. Hiyori demanded. How is that possible? The strawberry has no control over his Reiatsu, last I checked, and that was earlier today. I don't know, Hachigen admitted. Could he be in Soul Society or Hueco Mundo? Lisa asked calmly. It's possible, the Kido master conceded. But why would he? Shinji pointed out. He just killed Aizen. If he's working his way through killing someone for the first time, he should be with his family, and they're here in the living world now. Could we have been tricked by Aizen again? Rose inquired worriedly. Everyone fell silent as the idea sunk in. With Aizen, anything could be possible. Was Ichigo dead? Can you sense his father? Kensai demanded. After a moment, Hachigen nodded confidently. Yes, he is with Urahara. And how are their Reiatsu? Calm, but alert. Kensai nodded, folding his arms over his torso in a manner that suggested that Hachigen's response answered everything. Then Aizen truly is finished. Ichigo must simply be in Soul Society for some reason, and in no danger, otherwise their Reiatsu would be far more agitated. Everyone relaxed. The former Taicho's words made sense. I have a question. The rest of the wizard turned to Mashiro, who for once seemed uncertain rather than her normal cheerful self. Aizen's dead now, right? What are we going to do now? The question seemed to bring the reality of their situation down on them. Their goal was complete, though now the Shinigami forces knew that the wizard were alive and well. Well, Love said slowly. Surviving is still something we all want. We should probably change locations sometime soon. We don't want the Shinigami to come kill us. True, Kensai agreed, seizing the idea. No. The others turned in shock of hearing Hiyori's firm answer. What? I said no, you dumbasses. Don't you get it? The Shinigami know we're alive now, and let's face it, to them we're traitors. We've been traitors to them for 100 years, Hiyori, Shinji reminded her softly. Yes, but before now, they thought we were just hollows. Now they know that we have powers of both Shinigami and Hollow, and they are going to want to use our power, or destroy it. And I don't know about you, but I'll be damned if I work under those bastards ever again. But they'll track us, no matter where we go. Hachi's barriers are strong, but now they have that fucking Tosen creep who went and got himself Hollow powers too. She has a point, Hachigen admitted. Tosen could, with some help from the current Kido Corps, be able to break my barriers, and he might just able to track us. So what do you suggest? Lisa asked curiously. Hiyori had never been this passionate about getting stronger before, only about her need for vengeance and for fighting. If we want to survive, we need to get stronger. We need to be so strong, the Gote 13 has to think twice about even trying to take us on. Hiyori passionately ranted. What we need, is resurrection. If Ichigo can do it, why can't we? Let's get so strong that they have no choice but to let us be. And then what? Kensai asked coldly. And then we can work towards ensuring what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else, Love said quietly. Seeing everyone's gazes turning to him, he went on. We were marked as traitors because of Aizen's actions. We weren't given any choice in the matter, and we were to be executed by the orders of the Central 46. Let's change how Soul Society's government works, by saving anyone that is being punished unfairly by them, challenging them to gather all the information. Sooner or later, They'd go to war with us over that, Shinji warned. They wouldn't dare. Eyes snapped onto Rose, whose voice had taken on an odd tone. I see where you're going with this, love. We'd gather the information ourselves, and publicly prove they were wrong, every time. Without the ability to silence us without going to war, the Central 46 would be forced to repeal their decisions until they got their act together and actually do the proper investigations. If they didn't, the Central 46 would lose power, people would begin to revolt. Nobility won't like that, Kensai commented, though his mouth was beginning to turn upwards into a smirk. Who cares about fucking nobility? Hiyori demanded, a victorious smirk of her own showing to everyone what she thought of the idea. Let's do it. Hachigan nodded. It was a noble plan, and it did have an element of humiliating the government that had banished him and his Taicho. He had to admit that appealed to him. I'm in, Mashiro chirped. Why not? Was Lisa's response. Internally, she wondered what her old Taicho, Kiraku Shunsui, would have said about the idea. I suppose I'll find out. Shinji's face broke out into a wide grin, every one of his teeth showing. Sounds like we have a plan. Once we find Ichigo, we'll get him to teach us Resurrection. Chapter 31. In Memoriam. What do you mean I can't get in my body just yet? Ichigo demanded. Your body can't take your Reiatsu, Urahara explained easily. Quite frankly, you're too powerful for your mortal body. It would die in a day or two as your Reiatsu burned it alive from the inside out, possibly longer depending on your high-speed regeneration. Ichigo sighed, palming his face. Fine then, it's not like I didn't expect something like this might happen. What can we do about it? We have very limited options, Ichigo-kun. You see, the problem is that our Reiatsu cannot affect yours unless you consciously control it and lower it to our level, Urahara began. That means that we cannot seal your Reiatsu as we normally would. I could devise something for you in time, but I expect that you would rather join your body now, rather than in a week or two. The wizard gave him a flat look that clearly stated how he felt on the matter. Why can't you seal my Reiatsu? Our Reiatsu can't affect you anymore unless you let it, Ishin elaborated for Urahara, having decided to stick around for his son. It's too, for lack of a better phrase, highly evolved. You could compare it to an experienced fighter facing a rookie who has just picked up a wooden sword. Unless the fighter actively lowers his skill level, the rookie would never be able to strike him. In the same way, unless you actively lower your Reiatsu, we cannot normally affect it without using specialized tools which we currently do not have. Ichigo nodded, following the metaphor. Seeing his companion's understanding, Urahara continued where Ishin left off. So, if I were to seal your powers like any other Shinigami's, you would have to be constantly controlling and dampening your Reiatsu to be on the same plane of evolution as we are. If at any time that control slipped and your Reiatsu were to revert to an evolution higher than ours, the seal would break down at a very rapid rate. Your full Reiatsu would then flare, quickly decomposing your body from the inside out. I surmise it would be a quite painful experience. That made sense to an extent. So, what are the alternatives? Well, I can make you a Gigai that can tolerate the Reiatsu better until I can complete the device to help us seal your Reiatsu, Urahara said slowly. Or, Tessai and I can teach you how to seal your Reiatsu yourself. Ichigo barely suppressed a groan. More to learn. Oi, quit your griping, this will take care of your little problem touching people. That reminds me, Urahara, I thought that my Reiatsu kept me from touching people without hurting them. Tensa Zangetsu told me so, when my mother was in danger. But later, I was able to embrace her without a problem after I left Bankai. Do you know why? Ishin, already knowing this from Ichigo's explanation from earlier, was also looking at Urahara expectantly, hoping the scientist could answer the question. The shopkeeper mulled over his thoughts for a few moments before nodding. During the confrontation, your Reiatsu stayed at its evolved state so as to allow you your maximum fighting capabilities. Afterwards, it seems that your love for her and desire to protect made you instinctively suppress your Reiatsu, and lower it to the point where it would be anything but harmful to her. But, he warned, you cannot rely on that in your day-to-day life. If you even felt the slightest hint of aggression, playful or not, your Reiatsu would respond. Considering how frequently you are targeted by human gangs, unless you want them dead. I get it, Ichigo interrupted. But considering my poor control, how am I supposed to do something as complicated as sealing? That would be a problem if you were to try sealing someone else, Tessai agreed, stepping inside the room and crossing his arms over his chest. However, sealing one's own Reiatsu is not so difficult. It is a similar process to resealing your Zanpakuto out of Shikai. Ichigo rubbed the back of his head in a slightly embarrassed fashion. Ah, well, I've never done that. Yoruichi said that Zangetsu is a constant release type Zanpakuto. My lack of control means I give off too much Reiatsu, and it keeps Zangetsu in Shikai. My control never got good enough to try, and even if it did, I don't really care to keep him sealed. He's my partner, and he's always supported me. Why should I seal him away? Ichigo suddenly received a sense of wordless appreciation from his Zanpakuto. No problem, Zangetsu. Even so, it is a skill worth learning, Isshin pressed. Not only is it an important step in being able to fully control your Reiatsu, it may prove especially useful in future interaction with Soul Society. They usually prefer Shinigami to keep their Zanpakuto sealed at most times. Adhering to their customs could ease your path later, especially when dealing with nobility and possibly the Central 46. Not to mention, I'd like to see some of their faces if you release Zangetsu in front of them, Yoruichi's voice jumped in. Ichigo spun, not having detected her presence, and then spotted her on the windowsill, basking in some sunlight in her cat form. That would be a sight to remember forever. But Isshin's right, Ichigo. Before, it wasn't really a priority, since you needed as much power as possible, as quickly as possible. Now, though, it's time to refine your control, and being able to seal your Zanpakuto will help enormously in the long run. It may even make it easier for you to re-enter your body. Well, I suppose knowing how to do it doesn't mean having to do it all the time, Ichigo muttered. He respected both Yoruichi and Tessai as his teachers, and his father did have a point, so he was willing to trust them, though he was reluctant to seal away Zangetsu. What would happen if you were sealed, anyway? My power would be greatly limited, you would be largely cut off from me, and likely Cazador de la Luna as well, until you unsealed us or performed Jinzen. As a result, Cazador and I would be unable to see the outside world, and unable to converse with you regularly as we do now. What's the point of that? Ichigo asked, confused. Surely there has to be some sort of upside, or others wouldn't do it so often. Tessai-sensei, why does everyone keep their Zanpakuto sealed? To prevent accidents from happening, was the Kido master's simple response. Also, it's customary to do so, as walking around with their Zanpakuto released tends to be viewed as a threat and a challenge. Ichigo blinked. Even the Taicho, especially the Taicho, Isshin answered solemnly. Why? Urahara cleared his throat. The idea is a Shinigami should not have their Zanpakuto released unless they are planning to use them. It's based in the fact that most Shinigami don't have the Reiatsu necessary to keep them in Shikai all the time. What about talking to them, getting to know them? Ichigo demanded incredulously. That's what we have Jinzen for, Urahara explained with a shrug. Why are you so offended by it? It just seems so stifling for the Zanpakuto. Ichigo tried to describe how he felt. To be completely bottled up all the time, only able to see outside someone's inner world when the Shinigami feels like releasing them. Try to imagine being in Benihim's position for a moment. Unable to invent anything, unable to talk to anyone, just stuck there and unable to see anything unless she needs you to help her fight someone. And when was the last time you used Jinzen? Now it was Urahara's turn to blink, looking down at his cane that hid his own Zanpakuto. Huh, I hadn't thought of that. It sounds like a boring existence. Perhaps you have a point, Ichigo-kun. Regardless, if you want to re-enter your body, you will need to learn how to seal your own power, and the first step to that is sealing your Zanpakuto. It is all right, Ichigo. Like they said, doing this could come in handy. The wizard sighed. All right, how do we do this? Simply cut off the flow of your Reiatsu into Zangetsu, Yoruichi ordered. Try to keep as much of it as you can inside you. Ichigo closed his eyes and focused on his Reiatsu. It was so very, very vast and strong. Ignoring how his Reiatsu was emanating from him constantly, Ichigo traced how his power flowed. It took him a few minutes, but he finally located the river of power that ran through Zangetsu. He gave it a firm mental tug, pulling it away from its path and attempting to keep it in his body. It felt quite odd. If Ichigo could compare it to anything, it was like he was holding his breath, but not needing to breathe for a while. Opening his eyes, Ichigo reached up and felt Zangetsu's physical form, and was surprised to see that Zangetsu was still in his Shikai state. Confused, Ichigo closed his eyes again and took another look at where his Reiatsu entered the blade. Though the wizard still had a grip on the Reiatsu he'd pulled away from that path, some of the Reiatsu that he gave off into the air had apparently redirected itself to Zangetsu's pull. This is gonna be tougher than I thought. I don't think I can create and maintain as many grips as I would need to capture all the Reiatsu. Then compress all the Reiatsu into one place, and then grip it there. Nodding absently at Zangetsu's suggestion, and vaguely noting that a lot of the Zanpakuto's advice concerning his Reiatsu involved compression, Ichigo tried to think of a way to put all the Reiatsu in one place. What I need is a way to suck most of it back into my body and keep it there. He began to sigh, but then froze in mid-breath, having an idea. He slowly breathed in, mentally grasping as many strands of his Reiatsu as he could and pulling them back inside his body, combining and compressing them together. Making sure he had a good grasp on the combined strands, he breathed out and began again, pulling more of his Reiatsu each time. 3 more rounds later, Ichigo felt like he couldn't pull in any more without compromising what he already had. Time to test. The wizard once more reached up over his shoulder, and gripped something that was far different than cloth-wrapped metal, an actual hilt. His eyes flying open, Ichigo pulled what he knew had to be Zangetsu's sealed form out of its sheath, which had miraculously materialized on his back. The blade was a standard-sized katana, though a bit wider than most, with a red handle and a rectangular bronze hand guard. On the end of the handle were 2 light blue tassels. The hand guard had some decoration, though Ichigo had to look a lot closer to tell. It had stylized flame patterns on the long edges and small curved slits on the short ones. This is a properly sized version of the sword that I was using before I learned Shikai. Urahara nodded. I see you're finally able to control your Reiatsu enough to make your sword a normal size. I'm impressed. I thought you might generate that enormous version again. To be honest, I rather expected that monstrosity, Yoruichi admitted. Hold on a minute. Isshin drew his own Zanpakuto and held it out to compare against his son's. Look at them. My Engetsu is almost exactly the same as your Zangetsu, Ichigo. Ichigo blinked, before his jaw dropped. His father was right. They both had the same red handle, the same blue tassels, even similar lengths. The only thing different that Ichigo could see was the hand guard, where Isshin had an elongated hexagonal handguard, while the wizard's was rectangular. The near-identical appearances of their Zanpakuto startled Ichigo enough to accidentally loosen his grip on his Reiatsu, and suddenly Zangetsu glowed brightly before shifting into Shikai state. Sorry, Ichigo apologized. No matter, Urahara waved off. You succeeded, which is enough for the time being. Now, go through the same process, but this time, condense the Reiatsu as much as you can and imagine storing it in a symbol on your chest, as small a symbol as you can. This symbol will be the seal. When you're done, call out, Gente Rain. Be sure to keep your Reiatsu on a level that we can feel it, Isshin reminded his son. So we can figure out how much of your Reiatsu is sealed. Nodding and getting to work, Ichigo once more gathered as much of his Reiatsu as he could, and sealed Zangetsu. That done, he wondered what sort of symbol he should use, a sword. No, that's Zangetsu. A mask. No, that's Cazador. The word, seal, too suspicious if it's seen. Perhaps, a crescent moon. It worked as well as anything else Ichigo could immediately think of, so he decided to go with it. He mentally pushed the Reiatsu into the symbol, and imagined placing it over his heart. Quietly, he whispered, Gente Rain. Suddenly, Ichigo's grasp of his Reiatsu shattered, and so too did his sense of it. It was as though the Reiatsu wasn't there at all. Wait, that's not quite true, he amended as he caught a flicker of it on his chest. Opening his eyes again, he glanced down at his chest, using his left hand to pull the Shihakusho away from his body enough for him to see his skin. The symbol was there, white as the moon itself. The wizard relaxed, the feeling of holding his breath having disappeared when the symbol materialized. Glancing at Zangetsu, He felt a flash of frustration when he saw that the sword had once more resumed its Shikai form. Doing a quick assessment of his own Reiatsu emissions, he found that once he'd relaxed, he'd begun to leak Reiatsu, though not in the same quantities as before. Well, he asked expectantly, turning to his mentors. Urahara glanced at Tessai, whose face was unreadable. You have sealed approximately 20% of your Reiatsu, the Kido master finally judged. Ichigo sighed. Is it possible to place more than one seal upon a person? Of course, Urahara confirmed. But it is not usually a good idea for a long-term self-sealing. Why not? Seals, like all Bakudo, tend to reinforce each other, Isshin cut in. So by putting more than one seal on yourself, it becomes harder for you to remove them. Isn't that a good thing in this case? Ichigo pointed out, we don't want my seals to accidentally go off. There is that, Yoruichi agreed. How much more do we have to seal before Ichigo is back to something resembling his old power levels? One more ought to do it, Isshin judged. With a sigh, Ichigo performed the Gente Rain again, this time making a black crescent moon facing the opposite direction, so the tips almost touched and the combined symbols made a circle. Zangetsu was still in Shikai, but now Ichigo felt that if he needed to, he could keep Zangetsu sealed for a while, though why he would ever want to was still beyond him. Now that that was done, Ichigo did feel much weaker. He was down to between half and 2/3 of the power he'd had just a few minutes ago, and it wasn't regenerating. When he voiced this question aloud, he was greeted with a laugh from his father. It's still in your body, Ichigo. Isshin chortled. So your body doesn't recognize it as missing, you just don't have access to it at the moment. What I'm curious about is whether you can still put your Reiatsu on that stage of higher evolution, Urahara mused. Feeling curious about the results himself, Ichigo mentally made the indescribable change to his Reiatsu, the change brought on by the evolution he'd achieved in the Dongai. Ichigo almost jumped when all the other occupants in the room stumbled in place. Something wrong. It's just weird, Yoruichi told him. For your Reiatsu to just suddenly vanish entirely. So, it's not just a matter of how much Reiatsu you have, there's another factor involved, the scientist muttered just out of Ichigo's earshot. In any case, you should be able to get back in your body now. About time. Relaxing and feeling his Reiatsu settle back into its pre-evolutionary state, Ichigo promptly entered his body and immediately doubled over in pain. Isshin yelped and ran to get his son out of his body, but Urahara and Tessai bodily held him back. What are you doing? He's obviously in pain, Isshin yelled. We have to get him out. Look, having little other choice, Isshin did as he was told, and then noticed that Ichigo's body was growing a few inches, as was his hair. His facial structure was maturing somewhat, and the rest of his body was filling out somewhat. All in all, Isshin was watching his son's mortal body rapidly age from the point where Ichigo had left it 3 months ago, to what Ichigo now looked like. Well, that hurt, Ichigo rasped, straightening into a sitting position. Can I have some water? Of course. Tessai had a glass of water in his hand in seconds. Ichigo realized a moment later that perhaps he'd anticipated needing it. Do you feel any pain? Urahara pressed urgently. Any burning sensations? No. The wizard answered. Good. Now that you've sealed off enough of your Reiatsu not to harm yourself, your human body is acting as a buffer to the rest of your Reiatsu. As a result, you should now be able to touch others without harming them, no matter what stage of evolution your Reiatsu is in. I shouldn't have to tell you that you should not unseal your Reiatsu while inside your human body, he warned gravely. Right. How do I unseal it anyway? Ichigo asked, realizing belatedly that it was a rather important piece of information. Gather Reiatsu to the seal you want to undo, and call out Gente Kaijo, Yoruichi instructed before Urahara could open his mouth. She knew quite well that Urahara would have had Ichigo say some ridiculously long and embarrassing but ultimately useless phrase, and only tell the truth when it failed. He'd played the trick more than once on Ichigo, and on others as well. Urahara almost pouted at Yoruichi for spoiling his fun, but merely nodded. Ichigo, the substitute turned to face him questioningly. Isshin was just explaining to me before you arrived, that you want a vacation. Tell me what you want and I'll see to it that you get it. It's the least I can do after dragging you and your friends into this mess. Several minutes later, Ichigo left the shop in a better mood. He was on his way home when he heard a familiar voice yell, "Kurosaki-kun." Turning on the spot, Ichigo spotted Ishida, Chad and Inoue coming his way. "Hey guys. What happened to you?" Ishida gasped. "Your hair." "Trained in the Dongai for 3 months, Ichigo explained glibly. "Turns out time goes a lot slower in there than out here and in Soul Society, so I was able to get some last-minute training to take out Aizen. When I got back in my body, it aged accordingly." "Is he?" Inoue asked quietly. "Yeah, Aizen's dead. Blasted his head off myself." "Well, twice if you're counting," the wizard corrected himself. "But he's definitely dead now, and even if he wasn't, Urahara's got his body now and there's no way that Aizen's getting out of that one." Ichigo almost smiled when he saw his friends relax at the news. "And the Hogyoku?" Ishida pressed. "Urahara's got it again. He'll take care of it." Ichigo wasn't sure how to explain that the Hogyoku had its own sort of semi-conscious will according to the exile, and that it now registered Ichigo as its master. Nor did he want to go into detail on why it had happened. It was an experience that Ichigo just wanted to put behind him. "Good," Chad said simply. "So what now?" "We go on a week-long vacation," Ichigo answered his best friend. "All expenses paid trip to a nice beachside hotel. Urahara and Yoruichi will take care of anything that happens in Karakura while we're gone." "Who all is coming?" Inoue asked excitedly. "Just the 4 of us, plus Rukia and Renji if they want to come," Ichigo told her. "And anyone you guys want to invite." "Why them?" the Quincy asked, curious. "They're the only ones who doubled back and helped save Inoue, and they're almost sure to catch flack on that," Ichigo justified his decision. "Besides, they've been going through just as much shit as we have." "Point taken," Ishida conceded. "When is the vacation?" Chad asked. "Next week," Ichigo admitted. "They do need time to actually set up the trip." "Why is he doing this?" Ishida pondered aloud. Ichigo didn't answer. He had his suspicions, nothing else. "I suppose it doesn't matter," Ishida muttered, low enough that the others wouldn't hear him. Kurosaki, Sato, Inoue, the 3 turned to him questioningly. "I will make this quick. In order to receive the training I needed from my father to be of significant aid in the Winter War, I swore to halt most of my Quincy activities and resume life in a manner of someone not spiritually aware. As Aizen is dead, I am now forbidden to hunt hollows. I may only act in defense of a life should the situation present it. As such, I entrust the safety of Karakura to you." Ishida spun on his heel and began walking home, leaving 3 shocked people behind him. It hurt, Ishida had to admit, to leave the life he had chosen, the life where his intelligence and power could be used to their full potential. "But this is the price I chose to pay for the strength to protect. And he refused to regret it." "Ishida, is that it?" Ichigo demanded with traces of anger coloring his tone. "Is that the extent of your feelings? Will you just walk away from us like you no longer belong? You are Ishida Ryu, Quincy of the Winter War. More than that, you are our companion. Don't you get it, Kurosaki?" Ishida turned, his voice caustic. "How dare he make this harder than it is? I can no longer be a Quincy. I swore on the pride of my race. I cannot guard your back anymore, Kurosaki Ichigo, and I will not break my oath by associating with 3 people so intimately tied with the spiritual world, just for some half-assed effort to make me feel useful. Face it, Kurosaki, I'm not needed anymore. You are not our friend simply because of your powers," Chad rumbled. "If that were the case, then would we not have let you go when you had no powers, before Orihime restored them?" "Ishida-kun," Inoue whispered, taking a step towards her friend. "I understand. You are hurting, because you feel that if you cannot protect Karakura alongside us, then what was the point of making these bonds?" Ishida gaped at her, but had no chance to respond as the mistress of rejection continued with tears forming in her eyes. "We are your friends, Ishida-kun, but right now that gives you so much pain, doesn't it? You want to protect your home just as much as we do, and the knowledge that we're going to do it without you now just breaks your heart." Inoue brought her left hand to her heart, but her eyes never left Ishida's as she took another step forward. "You want to push us away so it hurts less, so you can resent us and your father in peace. But don't you see, Ishida-kun? You can never break the bonds we've forged together. We've been through too much." Memories flashed against his will in front of Ishida's eyes, he remembered fighting back-to-back with Kurosaki, and being shaken by the substitute's words reminding him of his grandfather's vision of Quincy and Shinigami working together, eventually taking on Ameno's Grande together. He recalled Chad and Inoue offering for him to join them in training under Yoruichi, and later working with them and Kurosaki to break into Soul Society to save Kuchiki Rukia. Training together, protecting Karakura together, invading Hawako Mundo to rescue Inoue together, she's right. We have been through too much. Ishida came to himself only to realize that Inoue had finished crossing the distance between them and had pulled him into a hug, her arms gently wrapped around his waist, his head over her left shoulder. He gaped, but once again was not given the chance to speak as Inoue's soft voice silenced his own. "It's okay," Inoue whispered. "It's okay to let us in, Ishida-kun. You're our friend, no matter what you think," Ichigo stated firmly from a few meters behind Inoue. "We'll figure it out together, all right." Chad merely nodded his agreement. Slowly, hesitantly, Ishida returned the beautiful girl's embrace. "Yeah," he finally assented. "All right." Almost an hour later, the four of them sat atop Ichigo's roof, looking at the sun as it finally began to set. None of them had had the destination in mind, but had ended up there after meandering through the town for a while, making sure no one was injured. "This has been the longest day of my life," Ichigo finally said as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Ishida chuckled lightly at the non sequitur. "Well, you did spend 3 months in the Dongai, Kurosaki. It's to be expected." He smirked but purposely did not look at Ichigo, who was glaring half-heartedly at him. Inoue giggled a little. "It all seems so strange," she admitted. "I was beginning to think it'd never be over." "In a way, it never will be," the Quincy said quietly, but not quietly enough it seemed, as Inoue's face scrunched up in a confused manner, though her eyes did not waver from the sun as it continued to descend. "What do you mean?" Ichigo shared a look with Ishida, whose eyes reflected a grim expectancy that made the wizard realize that Ishida had already thought past the Aizen conflict a while ago. "Of course, Ishida always did see further than I did." Ironic, given his glasses. Stifling a snort, Ichigo's eyes darted at Inoue, but the newly retired Quincy shook his head subtly. "Don't tell her." Ichigo understood. Inoue was an innocent, kind soul. It would break her heart to suspect that Soul Society was going to go after them next, and there was always the chance that somehow their friends in the Gote 13 would be able to keep that from happening. So, thinking quickly as he turned his eyes back to the sunset, he finally said, "He means that now that we're involved with Soul Society, there's probably always going to be something that we're going to end up in the middle of. Well, it'll be nice to stay in touch with our friends in Soul Society," Inoue concluded with a smile. After another few minutes, the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon. Ishida got up slowly. "I'm going to head home," he announced. "School in the morning, and after today, we're all going to need some rest." Seeing the wisdom in his words, though Ichigo felt a little silly thinking about school after the war he'd just finished earlier that day, the four of them parted ways. Jumping down to the ground, Ichigo walked in the front door, only to find his father in the middle of an aerial roundhouse kick. Without even breaking stride, Ichigo ducked underneath it, took a step forward and retaliated with a punch to the chest that sent Isshin flying back several feet. "Hey Dad," he said casually as if this happened every day, which it largely did. "What's Yuzu making for dinner?" Isshin got up quickly, rubbing his chest but grinning. "Your skills haven't deteriorated at all, my son. And Yuzu-chan won't let me into the kitchen to find out." "You're right on time, Ichi-ni," the aforementioned daughter chirped as she began to bring out the food, steaming hot with enticing aromas drifting in the air. Minutes later, all 4 living members of the Kurosaki family were sitting at the table and eating Yuzu's freshly prepared food with relish. "Hey, old man," Karen began after a minute. "Tell us about Mom." Isshin closed his eyes and swallowed his food, savoring the taste as he chose his words. Opening his eyes, he fixed a kind gaze at his fraternal twin daughters, with Ichigo nearby. "She's a wonderful woman who loves every one of you dearly. She was so happy to be a mother. I wish you could have known her so much longer just so you could feel the love and caring she felt and still feels for you." The food was almost forgotten on the table as the 3 children of the late mother listened closely. Yuzu and Karen were leaning in eagerly, while Ichigo merely smiled softly in remembrance. He'd had 9 wonderful years with his mother, and remembered being such a happy child. Kurosaki Masaki had always supported him, and had never failed to bring a smile to his face no matter what had happened. She liked to tease a little, Isshin recalled fondly. Gently of course, she could never stand hurting someone's feelings. Yuzu takes after her in that way. But she loved to poke fun at people, make them laugh at themselves. Let me tell you, she once. The next couple of hours were spent telling stories about Masaki, with even Ichigo contributing a couple that he could remember. And so, when the wizard lay down in his bed that night, he found himself feeling far more relaxed and at peace than he had for a long, long time. He felt himself drifting to the land of dreams. Hello again, Ichigo-kun. And awoke in a realm of nightmares. Ichigo's eyes went wide with horror, leaping out of bed and summoning Zangetsu to his hand, heart beating so loud that he felt it might just pound its way out of his chest. No, you can't be alive. For there in front of Ichigo's bed, the impossible image of Aizen Sosuke stood calmly with a triumphant smile on his face. Chapter 32, Impressions. Standing in the Taicho Assembly Hall, various Taicho began coming in and lining up in their customary places in 2 lines facing each other. However, there were several exceptions for this meeting. Hiraku Shunsui, Taicho of the 8th Division, instead stood apart from the 2 lines, standing at the head of the assembly where Yamamoto Sotaicho normally addressed his troops. In his place stood his Fukuteicho, Aizen Nanao. Similarly, Kira Fukuteicho stood in place for 3rd Division, Hisagi Fukuteicho for the 9th Division, and Sasaki Fukuteicho for 1st Division. The 5th Division stood unrepresented, as both its former Taicho, Aizen Sosuke, and its current Fukuteicho, Hinamori Momo, were dead and incapacitated respectively. Once everyone arrived, Hiraku nodded. As acting Sotaicho, I call this meeting to order. Unohana Taicho, report. Hinamori Fukuteicho will make a full recovery in the next few days, the healer began. It appears she was knocked out with minimal force. And Yamamoto Sotaicho, Hiraku had to fight not to call his sensei by his usual nickname, Yama-jii. As the acting leader, with all the potential disasters just waiting for someone to step badly to go off, he stood in an unenviable position. He acted with the authority of his sensei, but he was not nearly so respected and had to fill the old man's shoes, so to speak, until Yama-jii could recover. His reputation worked against him, and so Hiraku could not afford to act in his usual manner. He had to remain firm and serious, and make sure that everyone knew that he meant every word he said tonight. How troublesome. Maybe Nanao-chan will let me have more sake tonight. Yamamoto Sotaicho suffered serious injuries from his fight with Aizen. His chest had been punctured by what appears to be Aizen's hand, grievously damaging his right lung. He also acquired minor burns from his own flames, though they were easy to heal. His Reiatsu and blood were low, but it seems there was some first aid administered to keep his Reiatsu levels up. Physically, he has been almost completely healed. 7th Seat Yamada Hanataro's Zanpakuto was extremely helpful in that endeavor, and I suggest that Yukataki Taicho request his service in the near future to determine if his illness can be alleviated in any way. Unohana finished with a hopeful smile. Noted. What of Jin and Tosen? Tosen is merely exhausted. My medics are delaying his recovery by draining his Reiatsu as it returns and keeping him under a sleep Kido until he can be tried. Jin, however, suffered massive injury, and despite being near death summoned his Bankai. As a result, his strained his body and Reiatsu even further, and whether he will heal completely is still unknown. Given the state of Jin's Reiatsu, it was unwise to use traditional healing Kido on him. As a result, we were forced to rely almost entirely on Yamada's Zanpakuto, which healed the body directly rather than restoring the subject's Reiatsu. An interesting ability, Kuritsuchi observed, and quite suited to your division. One must wonder why he has not risen in rank. Unohana merely smiled slightly at the man. He requires more experience, Kuritsuchi Taicho, and has little confidence in his ability to defend himself. It will come in time. Hiraku nodded. It was good to have such promising Shinigami in the ranks, especially the healing division of the Gotei 13. Soifun Taicho, I know you have assigned some of your Onimitsukido to monitor the Kurosaki family. What have you gleaned so far? Nothing from them, Soifun answered truthfully. They will report back in 2 days. However, I overheard a private conversation between Kurosaki Ichigo and the manifestations of his Bankai spirit in his inner hollow before he returned to his family. Murmurs of interest arose, with all the Taicho looking at her interestedly. Soifin had to hide a smirk. She was damn good at her job. Tensa Zangetsu, Kurosaki's Bankai, takes the form of a young man with mid-length dark hair. He called Kurosaki, extremely overstressed, and advised him to take a vacation. Kurosaki's hollow is largely identical to Kurosaki himself, save for being much paler and having a mask fragment on his forehead. He too seemed concerned about Kurosaki's mental state, and suggested the vacation be to a beach in order to partake in typical male teenage actions. And Kurosaki himself? Byakuya asked. Soifin frowned. The information she was about to relay was important enough that it could not be left out, but would remind everyone that Kurosaki was human and quite young at that. He expressed a desire to feel like a teenager again, rather than a war veteran. He also repeatedly verbalized his worry concerning his Reiatsu accidentally harming his family, specifically his mother. There was silence for a few moments. I'd forgotten, Yukitake murmured, that he was so young. It is a shame, Komamura declared somberly, that we had to rely on a child to kill our foe for us. Why was Kurosaki's mother even there? Hitsugaya asked quietly. Simple, Kuritsuchi answered the young Taicho in a dismissive manner. Aizen had hoped to gain a psychological advantage over Kurosaki Ichigo. She was killed and eaten by the Grand Fisher several years ago when Kurosaki was 9 years old, Soifin contributed. It's likely that Aizen wanted to use her as a deterrent, and possibly to persuade Kurosaki to join him. Kiraku frowned. Soifin's last sentence had planted an idea in his head. One way or another, at least one Taicho spot needed to be filled, and that was Aizen's. Kurosaki Ichigo had killed Aizen in one-on-one combat, in full view of all the Taicho and Fukuteicho that were able in Soul Society at the time. While it was not the required 200 witnesses from the 5th Division that would allow Ichigo to be automatically promoted by trial of combat, it was still 5 Taicho and several Fukuteicho. Maybe, Kiraku quickly counted, there were 9 Taicho in the room. That was just enough to approve Ichigo's promotion to Taicho by way of personal recommendations, if all of them agreed, which was hard enough to do on subjects that weren't so controversial. It seems to me, he began, and silence fell immediately on the conversation, that regardless of what happens to Tosen and Jin, we have a Taicho position empty. According to the report I received from Soifin Taicho earlier today, Hinamori Fukuteicho went against orders and went to the living world to help against Aizen, only to be swayed by the traitor's words and illusions. Does anyone disagree that her mental state is now extremely perilous? The room was silent. Everyone there knew of Hinamori's devotion to Aizen before the man had betrayed them all, and her desperate belief that Aizen was somehow still a good person. If her beliefs had been verified by Aizen himself, then perilous was putting it lightly. I could, make some mental adjustments, Kuritsuchi offered after a few moments. Denied, Kiraku said instantly. However, the 5th Division is now in a rather poor position, is it not? It's Taicho a traitor, it's Fukuteicho mentally unstable, it requires new leadership. Someone charismatic, someone undeniably strong, but someone who is as different from Aizen as it is possible to be. Someone who embodies the traits defined by the 5th Division's flower, sacrifice, danger. By now, everyone knew what Kiraku was going to suggest, but as Kiraku was acting so Taicho, it would be a very large breach of decorum to interrupt him. Kurosaki Ichigo is charismatic, he has swayed even Aizen's own Arankar against him. Kurosaki is strong, he defeated Aizen even after Aizen's Hogyoku-induced evolutions. Kurosaki is as different from Aizen as it is possible to be, Aizen was subtle, Kurosaki is blunt. Aizen lacked empathy, Kurosaki apparently has too much of it to be able to sacrifice those he deems his own. Aizen preferred to sacrifice others, Kurosaki would rather sacrifice himself. With this in mind, I would recommend Kurosaki Ichigo be promoted to the position of Taicho of the 5th Division. However, he is a still living human, and we are sworn not to interfere with human lives whenever it can be avoided. So, I propose a new solution. I, Kiraku Shunsui, Taicho of the 8th Division, recommend Kurosaki Ichigo be promoted to part-time Taicho in preparation for his eventual death, at which point he will take on the position in full. Are there 5 others who will recommend him as well? Soifun could hardly believe her ears. She'd been thinking about ways to induct Kurosaki into the Gote 13 prior to his death, but somehow she'd not thought of that solution. It bound Kurosaki to the Gote 13, and gave them further rights and abilities to bind his power if need be. Barely suppressing a smile, she nodded. I, Soifun, Taicho of the 2nd Division, give my personal recommendation. Hana shook her head. I have not known him long enough, nor seen enough of his skills to be able to say one way or another. I cannot give my recommendation. Byakuya's expression did not change. Upon his return, he had immediately had his Fukutecho, Renji, brief him on what Kurosaki had accomplished since their fight. Mastering the mask, Resurrection, Sero, Garganta, learning Bakudo and new techniques with his Getsuga Tensho, Kurosaki Ichigo is certainly strong enough to be a Taicho, and has the drive to improve himself. He may be disrespectful at times, but he is certainly better than Zaraki. And, his mind flashed to Rukia's face, I owe him more than I care to admit. I, Kuchiki Byakuya, Taicho of the 6th Division, give my personal recommendation. Komamura was a hard person to read at the best of times, considering his bestial appearance. However, now his face could have been carved from stone and studied for months without revealing his true emotions. He didn't know what to think. He'd only really met the boy during the battle in the fake Karakura, and had observed Kurosaki's fights carefully when he'd had the opportunity. What he had seen, however, made him uneasy of the idea of recommending him. Kurosaki Ichigo had gone completely berserk in a Bankai Resurrection hybrid form, going toe-to-toe against Aizen. A berserker Taicho was not necessarily a good idea. However, if Komamura was thinking clearly, then Kurosaki could hardly be blamed for relying so heavily on his hollow powers. It was not as though Kurosaki had asked for them, and they had indeed provided the edge the substitute needed to not only survive, but win. And Kurosaki had recovered his sanity and regained control of the new form. But what truly weighed heavy on Komamura's mind was a conversation from when the pair of evolved juggernauts had warred against each other in Soul Society. Flashback. Have none of you thought about the implications for after this is all over? Soifun demanded heatedly. None of us can sense either Kurosaki or Aizen. If Aizen wins, he could just as easily disguise himself as Kurosaki, though he likely won't bother since his goal is to replace the Spirit King. But if Ichigo wins, there's a rogue, unstable wizard that we cannot sense, cannot defeat, and cannot control. Unstable. Abarai hissed in disbelief to Soifun's cool, if slightly cruel assessment of the situation. What has Ichigo ever done to us? He broke into Soul Society for the purpose of saving someone who saved him and his family. Name one other time he has done anything against Soul Society. Despite himself, Komamura had to admit that the Fukutecho had a point. Thus far, Kurosaki had been an extremely valuable ally and the ace in the hole needed to fight Aizen. And even his previous transgression could be forgiven. Kurosaki had acted with honor, and not taken any lives despite having the opportunity. It's not a chance we can take, Soifun countered coolly. Unfortunately, Komamura was also forced to recognize the assassin's point. To let Kurosaki live would be an incredible risk. It was practically a given that the boy would grow even stronger, and it seemed extremely unwise to let the still-living wizard become too powerful. So you would imprison or kill him for saving you, saving all of Soul Society and the living world? Abarai inquired incredulously. Some justice system we have. Should I go ask him to back off then, and let Aizen do what he wants? The words struck Komamura as though they were a physical slap to the face. Not only was Abarai questioning Soul Society's honor, but such words were treason. Abarai, he rebuked. You are out of line. Even so, he has a point, Kiraku pointed out with a stern look at Soifun. Though Abarai turned his head to resume watching Kurosaki, Komamura could not help but look at him for another few moments. The Fukutecho's words were digging painfully at the anthropomorphic canine's sense of justice. End flashback. Abarai had made his point. It would be extremely unethical to act against Kurosaki, who had done nothing to deserve it thus far. But there was still the question of Kurosaki's character. Komamura knew very little about Kurosaki's personality, though Soifun's report did provide some valuable insight. However, the way he'd taken charge and insisted there was still a way even if Yamamoto were to fail, it was obvious that Kurosaki kept a cool head in stressful situations, and was unafraid to do what he felt had to be done. Those were qualities that Komamura could respect in anyone, and qualities that would serve him well as a Taicho. I, Komamura Sajin, Taicho of the 7th Division, give my personal recommendation. Hiroku had to fight a smile. There were 4 of the requisite 6 recommendations already out there, and still a few Taicho left. So far, so good. Though, in order for his plan to work, Unohana would need to approve the recommendations after they'd been gathered. Hitsugaya's frown deepened. He was uncertain whether Ichigo would actually want to be a Taicho. Flashback. Ichigo scoffed. Soul Society might try to tolerate the existence of a human who could defeat some of their best Shinigami, since humans live for such a short term anyway compared to you. But a human who could defeat some of their best Shinigami, and then have an additional power to push himself beyond Taicho level. They'd assassinate me, or wear me down, or seal up my powers given the slightest excuse, because they'd be afraid I would come into their town and do the same damn thing. Preemptive strike my ass, and then to top things off, they'd try to recruit my power for the Gote 13. End flashback. Well, Ichigo, it seems that it's come to pass, he mused with a hidden sigh. Hitsugaya hadn't thought that his own trial of loyalty would come so soon. What was best? Ichigo rightfully held no love for the Gote 13, and probably feared for his own life now that his wizard abilities had been revealed. If I give my recommendation, and it goes through, Ichigo will have the choice to accept or not. If he accepts, then it provides a level of protection against the Central 46's rulings, and relaxes those afraid that he will turn against Soul Society. But if he turns it down, it may be considered spurning the Gote 13 and could be taken as both an insult and a threat, considering how strong he is. On the other hand, Hitsugaya reasoned, if it doesn't go through, Ichigo will be left for the Central 46's judgment regardless. Not for the first time, the Ice Wielder decided he hated politics. After another few moments of indecision, he decided honesty was the best policy. Before I give my recommendation, he stated clearly, I must remind you all that Kurosaki Ichigo has little love for Soul Society's government. So far, we have brought nothing but woe to him and his friends and family. What do you mean? Hiroku queried, interested. Allow me to list the offenses in chronological order, Hitsugaya began. During my assignment to the living world, Kurosaki informed me that 100 years ago, Soul Society attempted to execute Shinigami who had illegally acquired hollow powers against their consent. Yamamoto Sotaicho has confirmed this. As Soul Society has not publicly changed its stance, Kurosaki Ichigo can be quite sensibly afraid for his life now that he has irrevocably revealed that he is the same. Soifun Taicho has just revealed in this meeting that Kurosaki's mother was killed and eaten by the Grand Fisher 6 years ago. According to Kurosaki himself, after regaining control of his Resurrection form in the fake Karakura, he went berserk due to Aizen's revelation that he had sent the Grand Fisher to do the deed. However, it is Soul Society's responsibility to cleanse all hollows, especially those who have slain Shinigami, such as the Grand Fisher. Soul Society has failed to kill the Grand Fisher for 50 years, and can therefore be held liable. Several months ago, Kurosaki's family was targeted by a powerful hollow that proved itself beyond Kuchiki Rukia's abilities to purify. This should not have happened. Soul Society has had policies in place regarding humans with Reiatsu since before the Quincy Massacre, and the 12th Division had monitors in place in Karakura town as soon as we were aware that it was the Juraiki. We are all well aware of the hollow luring effect when a human's Reiatsu is greater than normal, and according to Kuchiki-san's report, Kurosaki broke a Bakudo before gaining any Shinigami powers. One could have heard a pin drop in the silence left after this most recent revelation. Seeing that most understood the implications, Hitsugaya wasn't quite sure about Zaraki, but was not about to stop to explain it. He continued. Not to disrespect Kuchiki-san's skills, but a more skilled Shinigami should have been sent to handle the inevitably stronger hollows. However, this did not happen. As a result, Soul Society is directly responsible for failing to protect Kurosaki's remaining family, and this failure forced him into a do-or-die situation that resulted in his becoming a substitute Shinigami. To make matters worse, Soul Society then punished him and Kuchiki-san for choosing the only option left to them, by having a Taicho nearly kill Kurosaki while taking Kuchiki-san to be tried. Soul Society then allowed itself to be fooled by one of its own Taicho to the point of nearly executing Kuchiki-san with the Sokyoku, which required Kurisaki's literally direct intervention to stop. After Aizen escaped, Soul Society proved itself incapable of handling the bound situation on its own and required Kurisaki's assistance. Just today, Soul Society has also proven to Kurosaki that it cannot be relied on when Kurosaki's allies requested assistance of their own, namely, regarding the brief capture of Inoue Orihime. And finally, Soul Society was unable to deal with Aizen on its own and even blatantly requested Kurosaki to sacrifice his town to finish Aizen himself. All said and told, I would not be surprised if Kurosaki was unwilling to work with Soul Society much longer, Hitsugaya concluded. The only reasons I can think of for him to continue would be to maintain the safety of those he has befriended in the Gote 13, and if I may be blunt, some of them are becoming quite disillusioned with Soul Society as well. Myself included. There were several mutters in the room at the last statement. Wow, Kira murmured, I hadn't realized, how could we have screwed up so badly? Aizen had a hand in several of those, but others were all us. Be grateful that Kurosaki-san either is unaware of the depth of Soul Society's failure, or is more forgiving than most, Hana advised from next to him. Hiroku cleared his throat, silencing the room once more. Where are you going with this? He asked pointedly. If you want Kurosaki to join the Gote 13 as Taicho of the 5th Division, then he will need reasons to feel that doing so is a good idea, Hitsugaya said simply. That said, should Kurosaki be persuaded, I, Hitsugaya Toshiro, Taicho of the 10th Division, give my personal recommendation. There, assuming Kurosaki's problems are addressed to his satisfaction, he gains protection from the Central 46. Not to mention, with so many Fukuteicho here, the information is bound to spread. He barely kept a smirk from forming on his face. With any luck, he will gain even more public support. Hiroku nodded gravely. Of course, things just can't ever be simple, can they? And you, Zaraki Taicho. This was the Taicho he knew for sure would recommend Ichigo. The boy was the only one who had been able to defeat Zaraki in many years, and Zaraki loved a good fight more than anything. Everyone, except Yakiru atop the Taicho's shoulder, looked at Zaraki with shocked expressions. To see him actually thinking it over could be nothing but a sign of the apocalypse. What are your thoughts, Zaraki Taicho? Yukitaki asked diplomatically, though inwardly still astounded. The way I see it, Ichigo's more than strong enough to do the job, and he'd probably be better at it than Aizen anyway, the enormously tall Taicho admitted, his face lacking its typical maniacal grin. If it were just that, I'd recommend him right now. But after what Ice Boy said, it seems to me that it'd look like we were just asking him for more permanent help, like we ain't able to do anything without him. Makes us look weak, and I don't like looking weak. One of these days, I will stop being so surprised when Zaraki points out something we should have already known, Hiroku swore silently to himself. But Ken-chan, Yakiru whined with all the cuteness of the child she resembled. I wanna see Ichi-kun again. Besides, you want to fight him again, right? He got so strong he beat Aizen, didn't he? You've got a point, Zaraki mused. Plus, things are never boring when he's around, are they? Nope, Yakiru chirped. I suppose it doesn't matter whether we look weak or not, as long as we keep getting stronger. Zaraki gave a predatory smirk up towards Kiraku. All right, Ichigo's got my recommendation. Yes, Kiraku mentally crowed. 6 recommendations. Now for the 3 approvals. In order for Ichigo to be made Taicho, all 3 of the remaining Taicho, Hana, Kuretsuchi, and Yukitaki, had to approve the recommendations. We now have 6 recommendations. In order for Kurosaki Ichigo to be promoted to Taicho, we now require approval from 3 other Taicho. His formality slipped a little, and he couldn't help but quirk his eyebrows and let his voice lilt a bit in amusement in the next line. Fortunately enough, we have 3 here. What say you? Kuretsuchi Taicho stroked his chin as he thought about it. It would be rather interesting, he thought aloud, to have a being whose Reiatsu transcends that of our understanding. It provides a unique opportunity to study the Reiatsu, and perhaps upgrade some of our technology. Having easy access to the subject by keeping him in Soul Society would be best. After all, he began to grin widely, thinking of the possibilities. Yes, Yes, I do believe I approve the nomination. Yukatake sighed. He was rather fond of Kurosaki Ichigo for a number of reasons, not the least of which was how he'd helped Rukia regain her old spark of life and confidence that she'd lost after killing Shiba Kyan. Ichigo was strong, and stood by what he felt was right. And though he'd apparently abandoned the Rukongai to Aizen to protect Karakura, Yukatake found he couldn't really blame Ichigo for it, though that might be because Ichigo had gone on to kill Aizen anyway. No, Yukatake didn't retain anger towards the young man, nor was he bitter that Ichigo had, in the span of a year, become stronger than Yukatake had in centuries. No, the sickly Taicho was proud of the boy for having managed to achieve his goal, acquiring the strength to protect his town. But the emotion that Yukatake held most regarding Ichigo was sorrow. It wasn't right, he felt, to have forced Ichigo into such a position. It wasn't right that despite all the good that Ichigo had done, despite what the substitute had sacrificed, despite what he'd gone through, that Soul Society now had to consider him a potential threat. It wasn't right that Ichigo now had the choice of either joining the same Soul Society that had done him so much wrong, as Toshiro had artfully illustrated, or face the likelihood of aggression. Yukatake knew what Kiraku was trying to do. He was trying to give Ichigo a chance to avoid another struggle for survival, another clash of titans. Both Taicho knew that Central 46 feared what it could not understand, and Ichigo himself had grown into a presence that literally could not be understood by any of the Shinigami in Soul Society, if his Reiatsu was any indicator. Their fear would lead them to order the Gote 13 to take action against Ichigo. But if the Gote 13 could legitimately claim with evidence that Ichigo was one of them, then it was possible for Ichigo to not only survive, but continue to protect his family. When thinking about it that way, Yukatake knew there was only one decision he could make. I approve the nomination, and if, somehow, it still came to be that the Central 46 ordered Ichigo's demise, Yukatake knew who he'd be siding with. Ichigo had earned that much. All eyes turned to Unohana. It was now up to her whether Kurosaki Ichigo would become a Taicho. But the healer wasn't sure at all. She had had minimal experience with the boy, only really interacting with him while Kurosaki-san was recuperating from Aizen's brutal attack. What she had seen then was promising, but still not enough. Unohana recognized that it was a good solution to have the one who killed Aizen take his place. It would fill up the hole in the ranks, and would aid Kurosaki-san in various ways. However, not one of the Taicho had considered what it would mean for everyone else. Namely, Hinamori Momo. The 4th Division Taicho mentally sighed. The poor girl. Hinamori-chan had only just begun to recover mentally from what Aizen had done to her, and now she was only going to be worse if what Sato-san and Ishida-san had said was true. If Aizen had personally convinced her once again that he was a good person, then Hinamori-chan is going to snap after learning that he's dead, Unohana thought sadly. To put Aizen's killer as Hinamori-chan's superior is just asking for her to gain a mental disorder. The Gote 13 would lose a valuable Shinigami if that happened. Shinigami who were unsafe to the rest of the Gote 13 were put in the maggot's nest where they couldn't hurt anyone outside it. However, if Kurosaki Ichigo were to not become a Taicho, then Hinamori could have a chance to recover, and it was not as though the boy could not take care of himself. But that led to another problem. Unohana had been a Taicho for just as long as Yukatake Jashiro and Kiraku Shunsui, and she too recognized Kurosaki-san's situation. If Kurosaki-san did not become a Taicho, then it was rather likely that the Central 46 would demand they execute him. Even from the little experience that Unohana had with the substitute Shinigami, she knew that Kurosaki-san would never simply let that happen. His will to live was too strong. And with his powers having transcended all of us, we would be forced to war. And Kurosaki-san has so many allies, from all kinds of beings, Vizard, Arankar, even in our own Shinigami ranks, so many would die. In comparison to that, what was the value of Hinamori-chan's life? Hinamori Momo, devout follower of Aizen, who was going to go after Kurosaki Ichigo one way or another, but Unohana was a healer, and it went against her being to sacrifice someone when it wasn't absolutely necessary. The future was always changing, especially with so many variables, there was no way to tell for sure what was going to happen. And Unohana Retsu was not going to sacrifice someone for a mere possibility that it would save other lives. I'm sorry, but I do not approve the recommendation. Did you really think you would win against me, Ichigo-kun? Aizen asked with a smile. He seemed to be in his pre-evolutionary state, human and all, though Ichigo could see a shine in his stomach that indicated the Hogyoku was there still. Even so, much to Ichigo's horror, he could not sense Aizen's Reiatsu. I did win. You're dead, Aizen, Ichigo insisted. Am I? Then how am I standing here? Ichigo had no answer to that. Not daring to look away from Aizen for even a moment, his left hand reached behind him, searching for his Shinigami badge so he could release himself from his body. But a second later, Aizen calmly brought his own left hand up, dangling the badge from his index finger. Looking for this. Ichigo's eyes narrowed. Bankai. Reiatsu swirled, obscuring the wizard from Aizen's sight, before Ichigo dashed at him with his Ajucha's masked Bankai form, Tensa Zangetsu already in motion. However, he had to hold back his Reiatsu from forming the instinctive Getsuga, from crushing everything. He could still sense his family's lives, and Ichigo refused to sacrifice them to kill Aizen. However, Tensa Zangetsu struck not flesh, but simple air. The image suddenly shattered into 1,000 shards, crumbling into spirit particles in midair. An illusion, but I never saw Kyoka Suigetsu's release. Ichigo protested aloud, searching through his memories for any instance of something, anything to indicate a change in Aizen's Zanpakuto. Have you forgotten, Ichigo? Aizen's voice said kindly from right behind him. Ichigo spun and cut right through him, and this image too shattered. When a Shinigami learns Bankai, they no longer need to speak to release their Shikai. It was simply a matter of sealing and releasing it too quickly for you to tell the difference. It was a horrifying realization. When does it matter? Aizen rebutted, materializing from Ichigo's left side. But surely you can figure out what happened. After all, Karakura is alive and well in the living world. I kept my word, and used parts of the Rukongai. I have the Okain. No, I killed you. I obliterated your head with a Sero, and felt your Reiatsu fade away. Ichigo denied, stepping back and shaking his head violently. You can't be alive, you just can't be. Do you really think it beyond my skills to create a fake corpse? Aizen asked slyly. I have done it before, you know. As for how I did it this time, it was quite simple, really. I regenerated quickly enough from your Sero, and felt another evolution from the Hogyoku beginning. I took the opportunity to overlay an illusion on a rock and used the Hogyoku's power to imbue it with its own Reiatsu. The evolved Shinigami smiled. I knew that it would be sufficient to fool you and your Ahara. You're lying, Ichigo claimed. The Shinigami would notice if you used part of the Rukongai. Ah, but you see, they haven't, and they won't. Kyoka Suigetsu allows me to control the senses of sight, hearing, touch, taste and smell of those it has hypnotized, as you well know. But that's only Shikai. To hide something more massive, something more was required. My Bankai. Ichigo could feel his world crumbling around him as his mind reeled from the realizations. His Ijuka's mask broke, falling into pieces as the wizard lost his grip on his hollow powers. Your Bankai. Of course. Did you think I didn't have it, Ichigo-kun? Aizen said in a gently teasing voice which infuriated Ichigo. My Bankai allows me to create a self-sustaining illusion that affects those same senses, but for anyone who enters that area, even those who have not seen my Shikai release. And on those who have, my Bankai has an additional effect. It dampens the ability to doubt what they see as anything but reality. There are downsides, of course. It takes an extremely large portion of my Reiatsu to create, and it will not start to regenerate until I break the illusion. The trader's smile grew somewhat. That's why I never used it earlier. I couldn't create an illusion wide enough to encompass all of Karakura without killing myself with Reiatsu depletion, and it does take some time to set up. But now, with the Hogyoku evolving me as it has, Ichigo felt like his brain was shutting down. I failed to protect everyone. He got me. Tensa Zangetsu, Cazador de la Luna, help me. Don't worry, Ichigo-kun, Aizen suggested with that same reassuring smile. I have what I wanted, and I have no intention of harming you or Karakura. I want to see if you can reach my level, after all. Grow stronger, Ichigo, I'll be waiting for you. And then the substitute's sight went black. Ichigo woke up with a gasp in his bed, panting and sweating like mad. It was dark out, and his clock read 1:03 a.m. Aizen. There wasn't time to waste. He reached for his badge, which was laying right on the desk where he'd left it the night before, and pressed it against his chest, pulling himself out of his human body, which fell backwards with a thump into the bed. He leapt out his window into the chilly night air, his eyes wide as he searched for any trace for the bastard. Zangetsu, please tell me that was just a nightmare, Ichigo begged. There is no way for me to tell, Zangetsu admitted. I am part of your soul, Ichigo. Everything that you see, dream or otherwise, can be seen by myself and Cazador de la Luna if we are unsealed, especially if you call upon us. I do not know if it was a nightmare, or if it truly took place. Is it even possible for Aizen to have done everything that he said he did there? Though I do not recall seeing it, he is correct in that he would not have needed to call out his Shikai verbally. And his Bankai does sound plausible. Is there any way for you to prove one way or another that what Aizen said was true? Cazador queried. Ichigo blinked and honestly thought about the question. It'd be too much of a coincidence if I imagined Aizen's Bankai power. But Soul Society doesn't know Aizen's Bankai, Zangetsu pointed out. He hid even his Shikai's true nature from them. What about checking Aizen's corpse? He said it was fake, and he had to do a rush job in order to evade us. If anyone could tell for certain, it'd be Urahara and maybe that healing Taicho, Hana. Ichigo perked up. Great idea. Knowing he wouldn't be able to rest until he knew one way or the other, he rushed to Urahara's and banged on the door loudly. Urahara, it's Ichigo. Let me in, it's important. A bleary-eyed shopkeeper came to the door, opening it slightly. Go, he asked in a confused manner, yawning. What's wrong? It's Aizen. Several minutes later, Ichigo was watching Urahara and Tessai, both awake and fully alert by the idea that Aizen could be alive still, both going over the headless corpse with medical Kido, searching for any hint of deception. After a tense half-hour, Tessai nodded to Urahara, who halted his Kido and turned to an anxiously waiting Ichigo. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with the corpse, he concluded. It's exactly what we expected to find. Even so, I would suggest bringing Inoue-san over for an inspection with her own abilities. If Aizen has somehow managed to fake his death, Inoue-san should be able to dispel the illusion. Somewhat reassured, Ichigo nodded. Thanks for taking the time to check. It was no problem. I am glad you came to me, Urahara responded, beginning to lead Ichigo back to the door. It would be a disaster if Aizen survived. Like I said, bring Inoue over tomorrow at some point to verify, but for the moment I suggest you try to get some rest. Nodding tiredly, how had he not noticed his own exhaustion before? Ichigo mumbled an agreement and began making his way home. It was just a nightmare, he rebuked himself. I can't be jumping at shadows anymore, Aizen's dead. He's dead and can't hurt anyone anymore. Just gotta relax. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.